She was 16 years old when she threw herself in front of a moving car to save a stranger. He was 17, bleeding, hunted, and terrified, when a black girl from Atlanta grabbed his wrist and pulled him out of death's path. That 1 second cost her everything. 3 broken ribs, a shattered future, 10 years of drowning in debt, while he disappeared back to a world she didn't know existed. Now he's found her again. But the frightened boy she saved is gone. What came back is something far more dangerous. If this story already has you gripping your seat, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rain came down hard that November, not the kind of rain that cools a city down or washes the streets clean. This was Atlanta doing what Atlanta did best in late fall, pouring everything it had like it was angry at the ground, like the sky had been holding something in for weeks and finally just let go. The gutters ran black with whatever the streets gave up. Steam rose off the asphalt in thin gray wisps where the cold air hit the hot pavement. Streetlights threw orange cones across the wet road, and every puddle looked like fire reflected in dirty glass. Nyla Brooks pulled her hood up tighter and kept walking. She was 16, 5'4", and wearing a jacket that wasn't waterproof, because the waterproof one had been sitting in a pile on her bedroom floor for 3 weeks, waiting to be repaired, and she kept forgetting to take it to the tailor because the tailor cost $14, and $14 was $14. Her shift at Lee's Diner had ended 40 minutes ago. Her feet hurt. Her lower back ached from carrying plates for 6 straight hours. She had exactly $11.73 in her pocket, which was tips from a Tuesday evening, which meant people had been cheap. She cut through the intersection at Delmar and 5th the same way she cut through it every night, diagonally, against the light, because the signal at that corner had been broken for 2 months, and the city hadn't fixed it yet, and everyone in the neighborhood knew to just go when it looked clear. It looked clear. She stepped off the curb. That was when she heard it, the sound of sneakers on wet pavement. Not running, but sprinting, the desperate kind, the kind where someone's lungs are already gone and they're running on fear instead of air. She turned her head left and saw him about 40 feet away. A boy, Korean, maybe her age, wearing a school jacket soaked through and plastered to his chest. He was running straight toward the intersection without slowing down. His face was turned back over his shoulder, which meant he wasn't watching where he was going, which meant he didn't see the black SUV rolling through the cross street at speed. Nyla saw it. The SUV had its headlights off. Later, she would think about that detail more than anything else. Headlights off on a rain-soaked street in the dark. Whoever was driving that vehicle wasn't trying to get somewhere. They were trying not to be seen. She didn't think. That was the truth of it. People said afterward, her mother said it, her teachers said it, the nurses said it. They said she was brave, she was heroic, she made a choice. But that wasn't how it happened. There was no choice. There was just her body moving before her brain had finished processing the geometry of the situation, before the calculation had time to run. Boy plus speed plus SUV minus headlights equals dead. Her body already knew the answer. She lunged. Both hands out, she shoved him from behind with everything she had, all 128 pounds of her, all the force her tired 16-year-old body could generate after 6 hours on her feet. She hit him mid-stride and drove him sideways, off the curb and onto the far side of the intersection, and she felt the displacement of air as the SUV passed so close that the side mirror clipped the back of her jacket and spun her hard into the pavement. She hit the asphalt with her left shoulder first, then her ribs, then the side of her head. The sound she made when she landed was not a scream. It was a grunt, animal, involuntary. And then silence, because silence was all her body had left to offer. The rain came down on her face. She stared up at the orange smear of the broken streetlight and tried to breathe, and found that breathing required something her ribs weren't willing to give. The boy was on his hands and knees 10 feet away, staring at her. Up close, in the fractured light, she could see him better. His face was younger than his size suggested, still carrying that teenage softness in the jaw that hadn't burned away yet. But his eyes were old. Scared, yes. Terrified, absolutely. But behind the fear there was something else, something Nyla didn't have words for at 16. An awareness, maybe. The look of someone who had already understood that the world could turn lethal without warning, and had simply been waiting for it to happen. There was a cut above his right eyebrow. Blood ran down his cheek, thinned and pinkened by the rain. "Hey," she managed. The word came out barely above a whisper. He crawled toward her. Don't move, he said. His English was careful, accented but precise, like someone who had studied it from textbooks rather than television. I think you're hurt. I can tell, she said. I'm going to... Get down! She grabbed his sleeve with fingers that didn't feel like her own and yanked him toward the ground. They're going to circle back. He froze, then dropped flat beside her without another word. She could feel the heat of him even through the cold and the rain, the heat of someone who'd been running hard for a long time. From the ground, she watched the SUV at the far end of the block swing into a slow, deliberate U-turn. She hadn't been wrong. Who are they? She asked. He was quiet for a long second, then, people I can't explain to you right now. That's a great answer. I'm sorry. Can you run? Can you? She tried to sit up. The pain in her ribs detonated like something had been lit inside her chest cavity. White, breathless, nauseating. She got halfway up and stopped. No, she admitted. He was already on his feet. He reached down without hesitation and pulled her up with both hands, and when she nearly buckled, he caught her, arm around her waist, her arm over his shoulder, and the two of them moved as fast as her broken ribs would allow toward the alley on the south side of the intersection. They made it into the shadow just as the SUV's headlights swept the corner. She pressed herself against the brick wall and breathed in tiny, controlled sips that kept the pain at a manageable level. Just enough oxygen to stay conscious, not enough to aggravate whatever had cracked or snapped inside her left side. Beside her, the boy was completely still. He didn't fidget. He didn't look panicked anymore. He had clicked into something else, a stillness that didn't belong on a 17-year-old, that belonged on someone much older and much harder. The SUV idled at the intersection for a long moment. Then it moved on. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Finally, the boy said, "My name is Kang Min Jae. Nyla. Nyla." He said it carefully, testing the sound of it. "Are you from here?" "Born and raised." "I have been in Atlanta 3 weeks," he said, "for school." Hell of a welcome. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. He looked down at where she was pressing one arm against her ribs. "You need a hospital." "I need about 4 things before I need a hospital, starting with those guys not coming back. They won't. Not tonight." He said it with a certainty that bothered her, not because she doubted him, but because a 17-year-old shouldn't sound that certain about what professional killers would or wouldn't do. "I'll call someone." "Your people?" A pause. "Yes?" "The same people who are apparently okay with you getting chased down a street in the rain? It's complicated. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." She almost laughed, which made her ribs punish her for it, which made her stop immediately. She leaned her head back against the brick and looked at him, really looked, because she was the kind of person who looked at people and she always had been. She saw the wet school jacket. She saw the cut above his eye. She saw the blood that had dried and been rewashed by the rain 3 times over. She saw the way he held himself, straight, contained, like someone had taught him from childhood that showing pain was a transaction you couldn't afford. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know." "You should clean that." "I know." "I'm serious. Head wounds don't look like much, but they bleed a lot, and if you're concussed..." "I'm not concussed." He met her eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For..." He gestured almost helplessly at the intersection behind them, at the wet pavement where she'd shoved him out of the vehicle's path, at the whole absurd situation. "For that." "You would have done the same," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she didn't know how to read. "I don't know if that's true," he said quietly. She didn't know what to do with that kind of honesty from a stranger, so she didn't try. She just said, "Call your people. I'll wait." He did. She waited. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. Min Jae's people arrived 4 minutes after that. Black cars, men in dark clothing who materialized out of nowhere and surrounded him like he was something valuable. She watched from her stretcher as they pulled him aside, spoke urgently in Korean, and she saw his face change. The boy who'd crouched beside her on the wet asphalt started disappearing. Something harder was sliding into place beneath the surface, the way ice forms over water that's been still too long. Before they took him, he walked back to where she was being loaded into the ambulance. He stood at the door and looked at her with those strange old eyes. "I'm going to make sure your hospital bills are covered," he said. You don't have to do that. I want to. Minjae. She tried to find his name in her mouth, and it came out naturally, like it had always been there. You don't know me. You just saved my life. He said it plainly, without drama. I know that. One of the men behind him said something in Korean. Low, urgent, impatient. Minjae held up one hand without turning around, and the man immediately fell silent. Nyla filed that away somewhere in the part of her brain that cataloged things worth remembering. I'll find you, he said, when everything settles. I'll find you, and I'll make sure you're okay. She wanted to tell him that she didn't need him to make sure of anything. She was Nyla Brooks, and she handled her own things, and she'd been doing it since she was old enough to understand that her mother couldn't always do it for her. She wanted to say all of that. Instead, she said, okay. The ambulance doors closed. That was the last time she saw Kong Minjae for 10 years. Well, the hospital confirmed 3 broken ribs on the left side, a mild concussion from the head impact, and extensive bruising across her shoulder, hip, and upper arm. The doctor, a tired man in his late 40s who'd clearly had a very long Tuesday, told her she was lucky. She asked him what lucky looked like, and he seemed briefly offended, and then she was sent to a room that smelled like cleaning fluid and left with an IV line and instructions not to move if she could avoid it. Her mother arrived 2 hours later. Diane Brooks was 41 years old that November and looked like someone who had been running at full speed for 2 decades and had recently started to feel it in her joints. She worked days at a hotel laundry and evenings at a clothing alterations shop, and she had the hands to prove it. Rough, efficient, capable hands that didn't flutter or tremble even when the rest of her was coming undone. When she walked into Nyla's room and saw her daughter lying there with tubes in her arm and her face swollen on one side, she stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds before crossing the room and sitting down in the chair beside the bed and taking Nyla's hand. She didn't cry. That wasn't Diane's way. Tell me, she said. Nyla told her. Most of it. The chase, the SUV, the boy, the shove. She left out the part about the men in dark cars because some parts of a story you don't give your mother if you want her to sleep. Diane listened. When Nyla finished, she was quiet for a moment. Where's the boy? She asked. Gone. Gone where? I don't know. Diane nodded once, the way she nodded when information arrived that she had already half anticipated and was simply confirming. His family's covering the bills? He said so. Did he give you a number, a name? Just his name. Another silence. Diane looked at her daughter's face, the swelling, the cut at her temple, the careful way she was holding herself against the pain, and something moved across her expression that she controlled almost immediately. Almost. You could have died, she said. I know. You didn't think about that. No? You never think about that. Mom, that's not a criticism, Nye. Diane squeezed her hand. That's just true. The hospital bill arrived 6 weeks later. Minjae's promise had not been kept. Whether it was because he'd meant it and circumstances had prevented it, or because it had been a panicked 17-year-old's instinct toward reassurance in a moment of crisis, she never knew. What she knew was the number on the paper, which was $47,000, which was a number that didn't belong in Diane Brooks's reality. The insurance covered a portion. A small portion. The remainder settled onto the Brooks household like weight onto a structure that had never been built to hold it. Nyla went back to Lee's diner 6 weeks after her discharge, still taped up, still breathing carefully. The doctor had told her 6 to 8 weeks of rest. She'd lasted 4. The physical therapy sessions she was supposed to attend 3 times a week she attended once, because the copay was $30 and $30 was $30. She never stopped watching the door. Not at the diner, not at school, not on the bus or in the grocery store, or in the dim stairwell of their apartment building. She watched every door she walked through for months, then years. Then eventually she stopped knowing she was doing it, and it just became the way she moved through the world, alert, waiting, half expecting a Korean boy in a wet school jacket to appear out of nowhere the same way he'd materialized running down a dark street. He didn't appear. The debt did. The debt appeared in letters and phone calls and numbers that grew rather than shrank, because the interest was predatory and they could barely keep up with minimum payments. It appeared in her mother's voice at 2 in the morning when Diane thought Nyla was asleep and sat at the kitchen table and went over the numbers again with a kind of quiet, desperate arithmetic. It appeared in the college acceptance letter that came in April, Division I school, partial scholarship, pre-med track, that Nyla read twice and then folded and put in a drawer because there was no universe in which leaving her mother made financial sense. It appeared in the physical therapy she never finished, which meant her left side healed crooked, which meant she'd always have a catch in her breathing when she ran hard, a tightness across her ribs on cold mornings, a small permanent reminder stitched into her body of the night she decided to save a stranger. She didn't regret it. That was the complicated part. Even 10 years later, even at 26, even exhausted and in debt and sleeping on her friend's couch in a one-bedroom apartment because she'd had to give up her own place 6 months ago when the emergency expense hit, even then, she didn't regret it. She'd ask herself sometimes, in the way you ask yourself things when you're tired enough that the filters drop, whether she would do it again if she knew what it cost. And the answer was always yes, which didn't make her feel noble. It just made her feel like herself. She was Nyla Brooks. She'd always been the kind of person who moved before she thought. It had cost her 10 years. The hospital where she worked now was a different hospital from the one that had treated her at 16. Same city, different part of it. A large medical center on the north side of Atlanta where she put in 12-hour shifts as a patient care technician, drawing blood and taking vitals and doing everything just below the threshold of what required a nursing degree, which she was working toward, slowly, one community college class at a time when money allowed, which it didn't always. The work was physical and thankless, and she was good at it in the way she was good at most things, quietly, without celebration, through repetition and attention to detail. The patients liked her. Most of them. Some of them were nasty in the way that sick and frightened people get nasty, and she'd developed a face for those situations, calm, impenetrable, professionally neutral, that her colleagues called her hospital face, and that cost her more energy to maintain than the actual physical work did. Her friend Tamara had given her the couch 3 months ago without being asked. Tamara worked in radiology and was one of those people who communicated primarily through bluntness and food. She'd left a plate covered in foil on the kitchen counter the first night Nyla moved in with a note that said, "Eat this. Stop apologizing for being here. This ends when you get back on your feet, not a second before." Nyla had eaten the food and cried a little, quietly, in the bathroom, and then stopped because crying was a use of energy she couldn't afford. She was 26 years old, and she was holding everything together with her bare hands and very little else. It was a Thursday morning in October when the letter came. She almost didn't see it. Tamara had left for an early shift before Nyla woke up, and the apartment was quiet and gray with morning light. When Nyla made coffee and checked her phone and then noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter with a sticky note on top in Tamara's handwriting. "Dropped in the mail slot last night. Fancy envelope. Smells expensive. Don't know what it is, but open it before you go to work." The envelope was good paper. Cream-colored, thick, with a texture to it that you only got in stationery that cost money. Her name was printed on the front in clean, measured type. Not a label, not a stamp, but typeset directly onto the envelope itself, which meant someone had arranged for it specifically. No return address. A Korean postage mark. She stood in the kitchen in her socks and yesterday's hospital scrubs and looked at the envelope for a long time before she opened it. Inside was a single card. Same heavy cream paper, 3 lines of text in English, in the same clean, measured type. "I never stopped looking for you. I need to see you. KMJ." And below that, a phone number. Nyla stood in her kitchen with the card in her hand and the coffee going cold behind her and felt something she didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't quite shock, because some part of her had never entirely stopped expecting this. It wasn't quite hope, because hope was something she'd learned to keep on a very short leash after the first few years. It was something rawer than both of those, something closer to the feeling of a scar being pressed, that specific combination of remembered pain and present sensation. She put the card down on the counter. She picked it up again. She put it in her pocket, drank the cold coffee standing over the sink, and went to work. She didn't call for 4 days. She didn't tell Tamara. She carried the card around in her pocket and thought about it at 2 in the morning when the hospital was quiet and she was charting at the nurse's station, and she thought about it on the bus home, and she thought about it on the couch at night when she was staring at the ceiling waiting for sleep that was taking its time arriving. She wasn't afraid of what she'd find on the other end of the call. That was the thing. She should have been afraid, probably. A card with no return address, from Korea, from a man who'd vanished 10 years ago with a promise he hadn't kept, who'd been chased down a street by people in a car with its headlights off. The smart move was obvious, but Nyla had never made decisions based on what was smart. She'd always made them based on what was true. And the truth was that she'd thought about Kang Min-jae more than she'd thought about almost anyone else in the last 10 years. Not romantically, not bitterly, but in the way you think about an event that changed the direction of your life. Not obsessively, just frequently. Like a bruise you press because the sensation tells you something important. She called on a Sunday afternoon. The line rang twice. Nyla. No question in it. He'd been expecting the call. His voice was deeper than she remembered. Steadier. The careful, textbook-precise English was still there, but it had aged. Less academic now, more settled, with a quality that came from spending 10 years giving instructions that people didn't argue with. You found me, she said. I told you I would. That was 10 years ago. I know. A pause. Not hesitation. He didn't seem like someone who hesitated anymore. Just a pause, deliberate, like he was choosing what to say with the same care he'd put into choosing the stationery. I had complications. I noticed. I want to explain them to you in person. Why in person? Because some things need to be said face to face, he said, and because I owe you more than a phone call. She looked out the window of Tamara's apartment at the October sky, gray and low, with the specific flat quality Atlanta sky got in the fall. You owe me an explanation, she said, and an apology, in that order. I know. Those are separate from the money. I know that too. I'm not... She stopped, tried again. Min-jae, I'm not calling about the money. I want to make that clear up front. I know you're not. He said it simply, without condescension. That's actually part of why I wanted to find you. She almost asked what he meant by that. She didn't. She felt like she needed to stay on solid ground a little longer before she started pulling threads. Where are you? She asked. Atlanta, he said. I arrived yesterday. She hadn't expected that. You came here? I came for you, he said. If that's acceptable. It was the most presumptuous thing anyone had ever said to her, delivered in the most matter-of-fact tone she'd ever heard. She sat with it for a moment, turning it over. There's a coffee shop, she said finally. Marietta and Howell Mill, Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. I'll be there. If you don't show up, I'm not calling again. I'll be there, he said again. Just that. Like it wasn't even a consideration. She hung up and sat very still in the quiet apartment for a long time. She went to the coffee shop on Tuesday, and he was already there when she arrived, which she'd half expected and half feared. He was sitting at a corner table with a clear sight line to both the door and the street window, the kind of seat a person chose when they'd been trained to think about exits, and he was alone. Though she noticed the car parked outside with two men in it that wasn't exactly subtle if you were paying attention, and she was always paying attention. He stood when she walked in. That was the first thing that registered. That he stood, automatically, without thinking about it. The way people do when standing for someone is something they were raised to do, and it's wired in too deep to be strategic. The second thing that registered was that he was not the boy she remembered. He was tall. She'd forgotten that, or maybe he hadn't been this tall at 17, still in the last of his growing then, maybe. He was somewhere around 6'1", lean in the way that came from discipline rather than luck, dressed in a dark jacket over a collarless shirt that probably cost more than 2 of her monthly paychecks and wore it the way expensive things look best, like he hadn't thought about it. His face had sharpened in the decades since she'd last seen it. The teenage softness was completely gone. What was left was clean and severe, built for a world where people read faces the way soldiers read terrain. He was... She cataloged this with the same clinical efficiency she used for everything, devastatingly handsome in the way that made her immediately suspicious of herself, because she'd learned early that noticing that kind of thing too quickly was usually a sign you needed to pay more attention to everything else. His eyes were the same. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. The eyes were exactly the same, old, aware, carrying that quality of someone who understood that the world was dangerous and had simply learned to live inside that fact. Except 10 years ago, they'd been scared. Now they weren't. You look like you haven't slept, he said, by way of greeting. Good morning to you too, she said, and sat down across from him. His mouth curved. Not a smile, not quite, but something that acknowledged the edge in what she'd said without flinching from it. He sat back down. A server appeared immediately, which told her something about how long he'd been there and what kind of presence he had in a room. She ordered coffee. He already had tea. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. She'd prepared for this. She'd spent 4 days preparing for it, and she'd told herself she would be measured, controlled, would let him make the opening moves and see where his ground was before she committed to anything. "Your ribs," he said. "What about them?" "The way you held yourself when you sat down, left side." She didn't answer for a moment. He was right. She still unconsciously protected that side, still sat at a slight tilt when she was tired or off guard. She hadn't noticed she was doing it. "They healed," she said. "Not completely." "Enough." He held her gaze. "Tell me about the last 10 years. "Why don't you tell me about yours first?" she said. "Since yours is apparently the one that required an explanation." A beat. Then he nodded once. "Fair." He talked for 20 minutes. He kept it sparse. Min-jae spoke the way he moved. She was beginning to understand efficiently, with nothing wasted. But even sparse, it was a lot. His father's syndicate, the hierarchy, the brutal education in who he was supposed to become, the years spent fighting for position, earning loyalty the only way the Kang family understood, which was through demonstrated willingness to do what needed to be done regardless of the cost. He didn't use the word mafia. He didn't need to. "The hospital bills," she said when he paused. "My father intercepted everything I tried to do for you," he said. "I didn't know that until much later. By the time I understood what had happened, 3 years had passed." "And after you understood?" "I tried to find you 3 times. Each time my father's people, he created obstacles." Something hardened in his jaw. "He didn't want me connected to anyone from that night in Atlanta." "Why?" "Because the men who were chasing me," Min-jae said carefully, "were sent by him." The coffee shop sounds continued around them. The espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations, someone's laptop keys. None of it touched the absolute stillness that opened up at their table. "Your father," she said. "Yes." "Sent men to chase you. He needed to consolidate an alliance with a rival organization, using me as a demonstration of vulnerability to be eliminated and then saved at the last moment. Controlled theater." His voice was flat, like he'd processed the emotion out of it long ago. "I wasn't supposed to actually die, just be frightened. But things escalated faster than he intended, and I ran, and then I stepped in front of his car," she said. "Yes." She sat with that for a long time. "He let you believe he'd handle my bills," she said. "He told me it was done." Min-jae looked at the table, then back at her. It was the first time since she'd walked in that he'd looked anything other than controlled. "I found out the truth when I was 21. I've been trying to find you since." 5 years, she said. 5 years. "He's that powerful." He was. Min-jae picked up his tea. "He's less powerful now." She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd done in the alley 10 years ago, and saw the same thing she'd always seen in him, underneath all the new hardness. She saw someone who'd grown up understanding that the world was shaped by forces that didn't care about what you deserved, and had decided to become one of those forces rather than be crushed by them. She understood that impulse completely. It didn't make him simple. "What do you want, Min-jae?" she asked. "To start with," he said, "I want to repay what you're owed." "The medical bills are the beginning," he said, "not the end." She set her coffee down. "I told you on the phone. I know what you told me." He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time she felt the weight of him. Not his size, not his apparent wealth or the men parked outside or any of the things that were supposed to be intimidating, just him, the concentrated attention of someone who was used to every room bending toward them. "I'm not doing this because I think you came here asking for money. I'm doing it because the trajectory of your life was altered by something I was involved in, and I have spent 10 years unable to correct that, and now I can. I'm not your charity project." "No," he agreed. "You're the woman who saved my life. Those are different things." She looked at him for a long moment. "I have a shift in 2 hours," she said finally. "I know I won't keep you." "How do you know?" "I know your schedule," he said, not apologetically, just as information. "I've been careful. I didn't want to surprise you at the hospital." "But you found my schedule." "Yes." That's She stopped. That should bother me more than it does. Should it? You tracked me down, Minjai. I looked for you for 5 years, he said quietly. When I finally found you, I wanted to be careful about how I approached this. Looking at your schedule wasn't surveillance. It was making sure I didn't do this wrong. She didn't know what to do with that. She also wasn't sure she entirely believed it, which she noted, which she filed. I'll think about it, she said. Whatever you're offering. That's all I'm asking. She stood to leave. He stood too, that same automatic reflex. She picked up her jacket and then paused. The boy you were, she said. In the alley. He's still in there somewhere? He was quiet for a moment. He's harder to reach than he used to be, he said. Yeah. She looked at him. I figured. She walked out of this coffee shop and felt his eyes on her back until she pushed through the door and turned the corner. And then she stopped against the wall outside and breathed for a moment with her hand pressed against her left ribs, the old habit, the old ache, and thought about what 10 years could do to a person and what 10 years could do to a frightened boy with old eyes, and what it meant that some part of her was less afraid of the answer than she probably should have been. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Thank you for coming. She stared at it, then typed back, Don't run my schedule again. His response came in 30 seconds. Noted. She put her phone in her pocket and started walking toward the bus stop, and the October wind came down the street and hit her face cold and clean, and somewhere behind her in the coffee shop, Kang Min-jae was watching the door she'd walked through and thinking things she couldn't read yet. She was going to have to decide what to do with him. And somewhere underneath the caution, underneath the 10 years of hard practical wisdom she'd built on top of herself like armor, somewhere underneath all of it, something was moving that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She wasn't sure yet if that was the most dangerous thing about him, or the most true. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she walked toward the bus in the October cold, was that she'd been followed since she left the apartment that morning. Not by Min-jae's men, by someone else's. Someone who had been watching Kang Min-jae since he landed in Atlanta. Someone who had now seen exactly what the most feared mafia boss in Seoul's criminal underworld cared about. And someone who understood with absolute clarity what that meant. The man who had followed Nyla that morning was named Park Hyun-soo, and he was very good at his job. He was 34 years old, former military intelligence, and had been working for the Jeong organization, the Kang Syndicate's primary rival in Seoul's criminal hierarchy, for 6 years. He was not large or physically intimidating. He was the kind of man who could stand in any room and be instantly forgotten, which was the most dangerous kind. He had a thin face, careful eyes, and the patient stillness of someone who had spent years learning that observation was more powerful than action. He sat in a cafe 2 blocks from where Nyla had gotten off the bus and sent a single message to his superior. Contact confirmed. She matters to him. Then he ordered another coffee and waited to see what happened next. Nyla's shift started at noon and ended at midnight, and by the time she got back to Tamara's apartment, her feet were beyond hurting. They were a separate problem existing at the end of her body that she was managing from a distance. She came through the door and found Tamara on the couch, with takeout boxes spread across the cushions and the television running something she wasn't really watching. And Tamara looked up and immediately said, You look like you wrestled someone and lost. Long shift. Nyla dropped her bag by the door. There's chicken in the box on the left. Tamara studied her. Also, you have a face. I always have a face. A specific face. The one you get when something happened that you haven't decided how to talk about yet. Tamara pointed the remote at her. Sit down and eat. Talking optional, but the food's mandatory. Nyla sat. She pulled the box toward her and ate for a few minutes without speaking, and Tamara left her to it, which was one of the many reasons she was the only person Nyla had ever been willing to ask for help. I met with him, she said finally. Tamara went very still. She knew the broad shape of the Min-jae story. Most of it. The medical version, the financial wreckage version, not all the details. Enough. And, she said, he's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Something easier to dismiss. Tamara was quiet for a moment. What does he want? He says he wants to repay what I'm owed, cover the debt, give me a job in one of his companies. What kind of companies? Legitimate ones, apparently. Apparently, Tamara repeated, and put a specific weight on the word. I know, Nyla said. Nyla, This man runs. I know what he runs. Do you? Because you're saying his name like that, like the way people say names when they're already in trouble. Nyla looked at her. I'm not in trouble. You went to that coffee shop to hear him out. And now you're home talking about him at midnight with that face. Tamara set her food down. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is someone who's been surviving on fumes for 2 years. And along comes a man with all the resources in the world. And that is a specific kind of dangerous that has nothing to do with whether he's a criminal. Nyla didn't answer. Because you might actually like him, Tamara said. And that's the part that scares me. The apartment was quiet for a moment. Outside, Atlanta moved through its late night. Sirens somewhere distant. A car bass-heavy through the wall. The ordinary sounds of a city that didn't stop. He knew my schedule, Nyla said. He'd looked into my life before he contacted me. That's not a small thing. No. She was quiet. But the way he said it, it wasn't possessive. It was careful. Like he'd been thinking about how not to alarm me, and that was his version of consideration. That is such a specific kind of red flag, Tamara said. I know. A man who researches you as a gesture of affection. I know. That's a man who thinks surveillance is a love language. Despite everything, Nyla almost smiled. I texted him and told him not to do it again. And? He said, noted. Tamara picked her food back up. I don't like this. You don't have to. I know I don't. I'm saying it anyway because that's what I do. She looked at Nyla with the direct, undecorated honesty that had always been her primary mode. If you decide to see him again, just know what you're walking into. All of it. Not just the version he shows you. That's always been the plan, Nyla said. Make sure it stays the plan. He called the next morning at 8. She was awake, had been awake since 6, which was usual because her body had decided years ago that sleeping past 6 was a luxury it didn't trust. And she was sitting on the couch with coffee when her phone lit up with the number she'd already saved, without entirely meaning to, under his initials. She picked up. I'd like to see you again, he said. Good morning to you too. Good morning. A pause, and she heard him recalibrate. A brief adjustment. Someone catching themselves doing things on autopilot that weren't appropriate for this particular conversation. I'm sorry. Good morning. Better. She drank her coffee. When? Today, if that works. It doesn't. I have a lecture at 2. I'm taking a class. And errands before that. Tomorrow? I work tomorrow. The day after? Min Jae. She set the coffee down. What's the urgency? A longer pause this time. I'm in Atlanta for a limited window, he said. I have obligations in Seoul that I can't push past a certain point. How long? 10 days, possibly 2 weeks. And you want to fit 10 years of conversation into 2 weeks. I want to start, he said. The rest doesn't have to happen in 2 weeks. She considered that. The rest. The careful implication that 2 weeks was a beginning rather than a conclusion. She filed it and kept her voice even. Tomorrow evening, she said. I'm off at 7. I can meet you somewhere at 8. I'll cook, he said. You'll cook? Yes. Where? I have a temporary residence. It's secure and private. If that's uncomfortable, send me the address, she said. I'll decide when I get there if I'm coming in. That's fair? I know it is. She hung up and looked at the wall of Tamara's apartment and thought about the word secure and how naturally it had come out of his mouth. Not as reassurance, but as description, the way you'd describe a building's square footage or its proximity to transit. Just a feature of the space, something that was considered as a matter of course. She thought about what kind of life produced that as a matter of course. The address he sent was in Buckhead, which told her something. The building was the kind that didn't list itself prominently. No marquee signage, no doorman visible from the street, just a clean glass entrance with a discreet panel and a man inside the lobby who was dressed like building security, but held himself like something else. He confirmed her name without her giving it, and sent her up to the 14th floor without making it feel like a process, which meant the process had already happened somewhere she couldn't see. She stood in the elevator and looked at herself in the mirrored door and thought, you're walking into a mafia boss's private residence. Then she thought, he cooked. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. It was large and mostly empty in the way that temporary residences are empty. Furniture that was expensive but impersonal, views of Atlanta that were objectively spectacular, and almost nothing that indicated who lived here. No photographs, no personal objects visible from the entrance, just clean lines, good lighting, and the smell of food that hit her immediately and was, without question, Korean. Minjae came out of the kitchen wearing a simple dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows and holding a dish towel, and for a second, just a second, she saw something in the apartment that she hadn't expected to find there. A person. Not the mafia boss, not the dangerous man from the coffee shop with the car parked outside. Just a person in a kitchen who'd been cooking, who had flour on one forearm and was looking at her with something that wasn't performance and wasn't strategy. "You came in," he said. "Jury's still out on whether that was smart." He almost smiled. "Come in." She came in. The food was doenjang jigae, fermented soybean paste stew, with rice and several small dishes arranged on the counter with the methodical care of someone who had cooked this way their whole life. She sat at the counter and watched him finish it, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her because she'd expected either tension or performance, and this was neither. "You cook," she said. "My mother taught me before she died," he said. He didn't look up from the stove. "I find it useful when I need to think." "How long has she been gone?" 14 years. She did the math. He'd been about 13. "I'm sorry." "She was the better of my parents," he said simply. "By a significant margin." She didn't push on it. "What did you need to think about today?" He looked up then. "You." "That's a very direct answer. I'm trying to be direct with you," he said. "You strike me as someone who recognizes when people aren't." "I do," she confirmed. "Then I'll keep doing it." He ladled the stew into bowls and set one in front of her. "Eat first, talk after. The food is better hot." She ate. It was extraordinary, rich and deep and complex in a way that took time and attention to produce. Not the kind of thing you made quickly or carelessly. She ate most of the bowl before she said anything else. "My mother used to say you can tell everything about a person by how they feed someone," she said. "What does this tell you?" "That you paid attention when your mother taught you." She looked at him. "And that you wanted me to know that." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe." "Don't maybe me. You know exactly what you're doing." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Okay." She set down her chopsticks. "Then let's talk about the job." Oh. He laid it out with the same economy he used for everything. One of his legitimate companies, a logistics and trade firm based in Seoul with a North American operations office in Atlanta, was looking for someone to lead a community outreach and HR compliance division. The position paid 3 times what she made at the hospital. It came with full benefits, housing stipend, and the ability to continue her nursing coursework. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Why does a logistics company need community outreach?" "Because I made it need it," he said. "I restructured the division 8 months ago to be a real function, not a cover." "Cover for what?" "Previously it was used to manage optics around syndicate-adjacent business interests." He said it flatly. "I ended that. It's a real HR compliance and community engagement function now. It needs someone who knows what they're doing. And you decided I know what I'm doing based on what exactly?" "Your educational record, your performance reviews at the hospital, which your supervisors apparently give openly to anyone who asks." He stopped at her expression. "I know." "You ran my performance reviews." "I wanted to be sure the role was appropriate before I offered it." "Minjae." She put her hands flat on the counter. "I need you to understand something. I am not a person who can be managed. I'm not a project you get to research and optimize and present a solution to. I'm a person. If you want to have a real conversation with me, that starts with you staying out of my files." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his jaw. Attention. Controlled. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right. I've spent 10 years in an environment where gathering information before approaching anything is survival instinct," he said. "I understand that's not how you operate. I'll adjust." "It's not just how I operate," she said. "It's basic respect." "Yes." No argument, no qualification. "I understand." She looked at him. Waited to see if there was a but coming. There wasn't. "The job," she said. "Still on the table. I need to think about it." "Take the time you need. I want to talk to a lawyer before I sign anything." "Of course." "My own lawyer. Not one connected to you. Naturally, she picked up her chopsticks again and ate for a moment. He refilled her bowl without asking, which she noted, the automatic hospitality, the attentiveness that was either genuine or so deeply practiced as to be functionally identical. "Tell me about the syndicate," she said. He set the pot down. "Specifically, how it works, what you actually run. I don't want the sanitized version." The sanitized version is that I oversee several large legitimate corporations with complex international interests. He sat down across from her. The real version is that the Kang Syndicate controls significant portions of Seoul's supply chain infrastructure, several major shipping routes through the Pacific, casino operations in 3 countries, and various other interests that exist in the space between legal and not. My father built most of it on violence and fear. I've spent the last 3 years trying to shift it towards something that doesn't require either. How successful have you been? More than my father's people expected, less than I'd like. Do people die? She asked. Direct? No sauce-softening. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Sometimes. Less than before. More than I'm comfortable with. And you're comfortable telling me that. You asked for the real version. She breathed out slowly. Most people in your position would lie. Most people in my position haven't been waiting 10 years for the chance to have this conversation. He held her eyes. I'm not going to lie to you, Nyla, about what I am, about what my world is. You can decide what to do with the truth, but you're going to have it. She sat with that for a long moment. The apartment was quiet around them. Atlanta a grid of lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the world outside continuing its business at a careful distance. Why does it matter? She asked quietly. What I decide. He was still for a moment, then, because you're the only person I've wanted to be honest with in a very long time. She didn't answer. After a moment, she said, I'm going to think about the job. Okay. And I'm going to see you again before you go back to Seoul. Okay. But I'm going home now, she said, because this is already a lot. I know. He stood when she stood. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the food. She pulled on her jacket. It was really good. My mother would have liked you, he said. She paused at the elevator, looked back at him standing in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel still over his shoulder and the city lights behind him. You don't know that, she said. She liked people who said exactly what they meant, he said. She didn't meet many. Nyla got in the elevator. The doors closed. She rode down 14 floors with her hands in her pockets and her jaw tight, and by the time she hit the lobby, she was already doing the calculation she'd been avoiding, the one where she admitted to herself that it wasn't the job she was considering. It was him. And that was the beginning of the problem. Well, 5 days passed. She saw him 3 more times, twice for meals, once for a walk through Piedmont Park, that somehow lasted 3 hours without either of them noticing. Each time, she understood him better. Each time, understanding him better made things more complicated rather than less. He was not an easy person. He was controlled in a way that could tip into cold, and there were moments, brief, usually when his phone interrupted something, where she saw the other version of him slide into place like a visor dropping, and the warmth was gone, and what was left was precise and impenetrable and capable of things she couldn't fully imagine. Then the call would end, the visor would come up, and he'd be looking at her again with those careful old eyes. She was not naive. She knew what she was watching. She just couldn't entirely make herself stop watching. On the 5th day, he called at 6 a.m. Something's happened, he said. His voice was flat in the way that meant controlled, not calm. She sat up on the couch. What? Someone's been watching you. One of my security team identified him yesterday, Park Hyun-soo, employed by the Jong organization. A beat. He's been following you since the day we met at the coffee shop. Her stomach went cold. Since the coffee shop? Yes. How long before your team noticed? A pause that told her the answer wasn't one he liked giving. 3 days. 3 days. She was already on her feet, moving to the window without thinking about it, then stopping herself because that was exactly the wrong instinct if someone was watching the building. So they know. The Jung people. They've known about me for 3 days. Yes. What does that mean for me? It means you're visible now, he said, in a way that has consequences. What kind of consequences, Min-jae? The Jung organization will use you as leverage if they can, he said. It's how they operate. They'll watch to determine how much I value you, then calculate whether the risk of moving against you is worth the advantage. And how much do you value me? She said. The question came out flat, not soft. She needed information, not reassurance. Enough that it's a problem, he said. The honest version. She'd asked for the honest version, and he kept giving it to her. What do I do? She said. Come here, he said. Until I can get Hyun-soo handled and assess how wide their surveillance has gone. I have security at this building that makes it the safest option. I'm not hiding in your apartment, Min-jae. It's not hiding. If I run to you, they've already won whatever calculation they're running, she said. I'm not doing that. She could hear him thinking on the other end, not hesitating, but running through angles. 2 of my men on you, he said finally. Discreet. Non-intrusive. Just coverage. Is that them watching me or you watching me? Both, he said. Honestly, she pressed her hand against her ribs. The old habit. Fine, she said. 2 men. But they stay invisible unless something actually happens. Agreed. And Min-jae. She made sure her voice was steady. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I know. I walked into that coffee shop and now someone is following me to work. I know. His voice dropped slightly. I'm sorry, truly. Sorry doesn't fix what visibility costs, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. A pause. But I can fix it, if you let me. She stood in Tamara's apartment in the early morning light and thought about what letting him fix things would require, and what it would cost, and how different that cost was from the one she'd already paid. Come get me, she said. We need to talk in person. I'm already downstairs, he said. She stopped. You're already... I called you from the car. His voice was careful. When my security flagged the surveillance, I came. I didn't want to tell you over the phone and leave you there alone. She stood very still. Part of her wanted to be angry about it. The presumption, the unilateral decision, the way he just arrived. And part of her, the part she was having increasing difficulty overruling, felt something shift in her chest that wasn't anger at all. Give me 5 minutes, she said. Take 10, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She got dressed in 7. She was almost to the door when Tamara appeared from the bedroom, half awake, reading Nyla's face with the accuracy of someone who'd known her for 8 years. What happened? Tamara said. Someone's been following me, Nyla said. Connected to a rival organization. Min-jae's security caught it. I'm going to go figure out what it means. Tamara stared at her. Nyla. I know. You've known this man 11 days. I know. And you're already being tailed by Korean crime organizations. I'm not saying don't go. Tamara crossed her arms. I'm saying look at me first. Nyla looked at her. Come back, Tamara said. Just that. Direct and quiet. And underneath it something real that had nothing to do with drama. I'm coming back, Nyla said. She walked out the door and down the stairs and through the lobby and out onto the morning street where a black car sat at the curb with its engine idling. And when she got in, Min-jae was in the back seat, and he looked at her with those eyes that she'd stopped being able to read, as just careful, and started reading as something else. And she looked back at him and thought, this is the point where a smart person stops. Then the car pulled away from the curb, and someone took a photograph of the license plate from a building across the street, and that photograph was transmitted to a phone in Seoul within 4 minutes. And the man who received it looked at it for a long moment and then made a call to his father. The message was simple. She's in the car. It's confirmed. The man receiving that call was Kang Dae-sung, and on the other end of the line, the former patriarch of the Kang Syndicate said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, bring me everything you have on her mother. The car moved through Atlanta's morning traffic, and neither of them spoke for the first several minutes, which told Nyla something. That Min-jae was running calculations she couldn't see. That the controlled stillness beside her wasn't peace, but the opposite of it. She watched his hands. They were flat on his thighs, perfectly still, and that stillness cost him something. She could feel the cost of it the way you feel temperature change without seeing it happen. How long has Jung been watching you? She asked. Longer than Hyun-soo, he said. Hyun-soo is recent, a field operative assigned specifically to Atlanta once they knew I was here. The broader surveillance on my movements has been running for months. So they were watching you, and they found me. Yes. And now your father knows about me. He turned to look at her. Who told you that? Nobody told me anything, she said. You said rival organization. The Zhang people are watching you. Your father arranged what happened 10 years ago through an alliance with a rival organization. She kept her voice even. How many rival organizations are there? A pause. The significant ones? 3. And of the significant ones, which one would your father use to run surveillance on you now? He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Atlanta slid past. Gas stations, strip malls, the ordinary morning architecture of a city going to work. He would use the one that already has infrastructure in Atlanta, Minjae said finally. The Zhang organization. Yes. So Hyun-soo wasn't working for a rival, she said. He was working for your father. The word father came out of her mouth like something she was handling carefully, at a distance, because she already understood it was explosive. Minjae looked out the window. His jaw was a hard line. I don't have confirmation of that. But you think it. I think it's the most logical reading, yes. Then say it. He turned back to her. My father likely knows about you, he said. And he likely knows before I intended him to, because I was careful, but not careful enough, and he has eyes I don't always account for. Why didn't you lead with that this morning? Because I needed to think through what it meant before I said it out loud. What it means, she said, is that the man who arranged to have you chase down a street when you were 17 now has information about me. That's what it means. Yes. And you brought me into a car. To keep you safe, to keep me contained, she said. Not accusing, clinical, precise. Whether you mean it that way or not, Minjae, the effect is the same. I'm in your car, going to your location, because someone connected to your world is following me. That's not safety. That's capture with better intentions. He absorbed that without deflection. She watched him take it in and not argue with it, which was either honesty or strategy, and she was having increasing difficulty telling the difference. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to know everything, she said. Right now. Not the version you've been giving me in pieces. Everything your father knows, everything Zhang has on me, and what the realistic threat level is for someone who has no stake in any of this beyond the fact that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time 11 days ago. You weren't in the wrong place, he said quietly. Don't do that, she said. Don't make it romantic right now. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said to the driver, in Korean, something short and decisive. The car changed direction. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere I can show you instead of tell you, he said. It'll be faster. The building they pulled up to 40 minutes later was not in Buckhead. It was in a quieter part of the city, an unremarkable office building with a parking structure attached, and they went up to the 3rd floor and through a door that required a keypad and a second check she didn't see the mechanism for. And inside was a room that looked like a very clean, very sober version of a war room. Screens on one wall. A table. 3 men who stood when Minjae entered and whose eyes went immediately to Nyla with the specific quality of people assessing a variable. Minjae said something to them in Korean. 2 of them left. The third, a lean man in his late 30s with close-cropped hair and the kind of face that processed information faster than it showed it, stayed, and Minjae switched to English. This is Yoon Jae-won, he said. He runs my security operations. Jae-won nodded at her. Not warmly, but not hostilely either. The nod of a professional acknowledging a situation. Show her what we have on Hyun-soo, Minjae said. Jae-won turned to the screens without comment and pulled up a file. Neela stood in front of it and read. Park Hyun-soo. Zhang Organization Field Operative. Atlanta deployment. Confirmed 11 days ago. Surveillance targets. Kang Min-jae. Secondary target identified as Nyla Brooks. Subject confirmed contact with primary target day 1. Photographs taken, 47. Locations documented, Nyla's workplace, Tamara's building, the coffee shop, the Buckhead residence, Piedmont Park. 47 photographs. She'd been photographed 47 times in 11 days without knowing. She stood very still and read the whole thing and kept her breathing controlled and even because losing her composure in this room in front of these people was not something she was willing to do. The transmission log at the bottom, Jae-won said. The photographs were being sent in batches. The last batch went to 2 recipients. 2, Minjae said. He hadn't looked at the screen yet. He was looking at Nyla. The Zhang Organization's Seoul office, Jae-won said, and a private number registered to a shell company in Busan. He pulled up a second screen. The shell company's registration. The director listed on the incorporation documents, Kang Dae-sung. Nyla read the name. She'd never seen it written down before. She'd only heard Min Jae say it twice, and both times he'd said it the way people say the names of things that cost them. So it's confirmed, she said. Yes, Jae-won said. Your father is working with the Jong organization against you, she said to Min Jae. Against me, and now against you, he said. Yes. She turned away from the screen. She needed to move. Standing still was making the information stack up too fast. And when information stacked up too fast, she made bad decisions. And she couldn't afford bad decisions right now. She walked to the window and looked at the parking structure and the ordinary Atlanta street beyond it and breathed. What does he want? She asked. He wants control of the syndicate back, Min Jae said. He lost it 18 months ago. I took it legally through the council. He'd made too many enemies by then to hold the vote. He's been building a counter-coalition since. And you're a pressure point, Jae-won said. When she looked at him, he continued in the same flat professional tone. If Dae-sung can demonstrate to the council that Mr. Kang's judgment is compromised by a personal attachment to an outside party, he has grounds to call a formal challenge to the leadership. He needs evidence that you represent a liability. Evidence like surveillance photographs, she said. Evidence like the pattern of behavior those photographs document, Jae-won said. 5 meetings in 11 days, private residence, personal car. The pattern reads as significant attachment. Is it significant enough? She asked. She was asking Min Jae now. He held her gaze. By the standards of the council, yes. And by your standards? A pause that told her everything before he answered it. Yes, he said. She turned back to the window. Outside, a delivery truck was idling at the curb. A woman walked past it with a dog that kept stopping to investigate the tire. The ordinary world, running its ordinary business without any awareness of the architecture of consequence being built around it. What does he have on my mother? She asked. Complete silence behind her. She turned around. Min Jae and Jae-won were looking at each other with a specific quality she recognized from the hospital. The look of two people deciding how to deliver information that was going to hurt. What does he have on my mother? She said again. Slower. Harder. Jae-won looked at Min Jae. Min Jae gave a short nod. Dae-sung's people made contact with your mother's current medical providers 2 days ago, Jae-won said, identifying themselves as representatives of a debt collection firm. They now have her full current medical record, her ongoing treatment details, and her home address. Neela felt the room change temperature, or she changed temperature. She couldn't tell the difference. Her mother's medical record, her mother's address. She's in treatment? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was making her voice steady through sheer force. Yes, Jae-won said carefully. Chronic condition. Managed, but... I know what she has, Nyla said. I've been managing her appointments for 3 years. She looked at Min Jae. He has her address. Yes. He has her medical record. Yes. And he got it 2 days ago, which was before you knew he was watching me, which means you're 3 days behind his information and 2 days behind his actions. Min Jae's jaw was tight. Yes. My mother is a 61-year-old woman with a heart condition, and she is currently alone in her apartment, and your father has her address. She said each clause separately, distinctly, because she needed to hear the full shape of it. And you brought me here. Where is she right now? She's... Jae-won checked something. We have eyes on her building as of 40 minutes ago. She's inside. No activity. You already had eyes on her building. When we identified the scope of Dae-sung's surveillance, we moved coverage to your primary contacts immediately, Jae-won said. So you knew about my mother before you called me this morning, she said to Min Jae. The silence was her answer. You knew, she said, and you called me to come to you. You didn't tell me they had my mother's information. You told me someone was following me and you needed me somewhere safe, and you let me get in the car thinking the threat was to me. The threat is to you. The threat is to my mother, she said. The steadiness in her voice was costing her something structural now. She could feel the foundations of it under stress. That's what he'll use. He won't touch me. I'm connected to you and touching me has consequences. But my mother is just a 61-year-old woman with a heart condition and a medical record that someone just obtained illegally. And she doesn't have any protection except me. She has mine now, Min Jae said. She didn't ask for yours. Nyla took a step toward him. She doesn't know any of this exists. She has spent 10 years cleaning up the damage the last time your world touched our lives, and she has no idea it just reached back out. I know, he said. Say something other than I know. I'm trying to protect her. By keeping information from me. She stopped 2 feet from him. This close she could see the tension in his face, not the controlled professional mask, but something underneath it, something that was actually conflicted, that was actually struggling. She didn't let it move her yet. I asked you for honesty. I asked you for it specifically, Min-jae, because I told you that's the only way this works. And the first time something hard came up, you managed the information. I was trying to avoid panic. I don't panic, she said. That's the thing about me you keep underestimating. I don't panic. I assess. I handle. I have been handling things since I was 16 years old and none of them have broken me yet. She held his gaze. But I cannot handle what I don't know. And I cannot protect my mother from information you're keeping from me. He stood there and took it. All of it, without looking away. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I made the wrong call, he said. I should have told you everything on the phone. Yes, she said. You should have. Chaewon had found something in his peripheral professional vision to study intensely during this exchange. Nobody acknowledged it. I need to go to my mother, she said. Let me take you. No. She picked up her jacket. I'll go alone. With your invisible men if you insist, but I'm not showing up at my mother's door in one of your cars. Nyla, she doesn't know about you, she said. She doesn't know what any of this is, and she's not going to find out by watching me get out of an armored SUV. She looked at him. I'm going to go see her, make sure she's okay, and figure out what she needs to know and how to tell it. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to figure out what happens next. And if Daesung moves before you get back, then your men handle it, she said. That's what they're there for. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something to Jaewon in Korean. Jaewon nodded. 2 men on you, Min-jae said. Jaewon will give you a phone, direct line to his team. If anything feels wrong, I'll use it, she said. She took the phone from Chaewon. I'm coming back, she said to Min-jae. Not a reassurance, a statement of fact. But when I do, there's no more managed information. Everything, all of it. Whatever your father has, whatever the Jeong people are planning, whatever the council situation is, I need the full picture. You'll have it, he said. She believed him. She wasn't sure if that made her smart or not. She left. Her mother's apartment was in a quiet part of southwest Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood that had been many things over many decades and was currently in the middle of deciding what it wanted to be next. The building was 3 stories, well-maintained in the practical way of places where people actually lived rather than invested, and Diane Brooks lived on the 2nd floor in an apartment that smelled like the specific combination of good cooking and mentholated cream that had meant safety to Nyla since childhood. Diane answered the door in her housecoat and looked at her daughter's face and said, Come in, sit down, tell me what happened. Good morning to you too, Nyla said. Nyla Renee Brooks. She went in. She sat down. She looked at her mother. At the careful way Diane moved now, the slight breathlessness on exertion, the pill organizer on the kitchen counter sorted by day and time, and thought about a shell company in Busan and a man she'd never met who now had all of this information in a file somewhere. There's something I need to tell you, she said. I know, Diane said. She sat down across from her daughter with the particular stillness of a woman who had spent decades preparing herself to receive difficult information. You have that face. I have a lot of faces, apparently. You have 3, Diane said. There's the one where you're tired, the one where you're handling something alone, and the one where you're about to tell me something you've been putting off. She folded her hands in her lap. That's the 3rd one, Nyla told her. Not all of it. There was no version of all of it that she could give her mother in one sitting, and some parts of the story were still moving too fast to hand to someone who needed to stay calm. But the shape of it, Min-jae, the letter, the coffee shop, the surveillance, the man in Seoul who now had her address. Diane listened the way she always listened, completely, without interruption, with her hands still and her face giving nothing away until she had all the information she needed to have a feeling about it. When Nyla finished, Diane was quiet for a full 30 seconds. The same boy, she said. Yes. The one from the hospital. Yes. Diane looked at the window, then back at her daughter. You should have told me he contacted you. I know. I wanted to. Before you went to meet him, Nee. Not after his father has my address. Nyla didn't argue with that. She couldn't. I know. What does he want from you? He says he wants to repay what happened. The debt. And she paused. He wants to see me. See you how? I don't know yet. It's complicated. Diane's expression moved through several things without settling. Is he dangerous? Yes, Nyla said, immediately, without softening. His world is dangerous. He's not trying to hurt me, Mom. I genuinely believe that. But the world around him doesn't care what he's trying. And his father is the problem. Diane stood and went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink. She was running her own calculation. Nyla knew the rhythm of it, had watched it her whole life. The way her mother processed crisis. Water, stillness, the specific silence of a woman who had always had to think clearly under pressure because there was nobody else to do it. What do you need from me? Diane asked finally. I need you to let me move you temporarily, Nyla said. Somewhere that isn't this address. Just until... No. Mom, I am 61 years old and this is my home, and I will not be moved out of it because some man in Korea is trying to frighten my daughter. Diane turned around. Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm that had infrastructure behind it. I have lived in this city my whole life. I have raised you in this city. I have worked and paid and struggled in this city, and I will not be run out of my apartment by a man who doesn't know my name. He has your medical record, Nyla said. He knows exactly what you have and what happens if you're under sustained stress. Diane's expression flickered. Something went across it. Fear, quickly processed, quickly integrated, not eliminated, but disciplined. Then I won't be under sustained stress, she said. Mom, this isn't... Bring him to me, Diane said. Nyla stopped. What? Bring the boy to me, Diane said. If he's what you say he is, if he's serious about protecting us, then he should be able to say so to my face. She looked at her daughter steadily. And you should see what he does when I'm the one in the room. Nyla sat with that, turned it over. Her mother's tests had always been simple and brutal, and they had always told the truth. Okay, she said slowly. Good. Diane sat back down. Now make me coffee and tell me what you actually think about him. Not the situation. Him. Nyla got up and went to the kitchen. That's a complicated question. Simple questions don't tell you anything. She made the coffee. She thought about how to answer. He's honest, she said, in a way that's uncomfortable because it doesn't come with softness. He just tells you true things directly and lets you deal with them. Good or bad? Both. He managed information from me this morning to avoid alarming me. That's a bad instinct, but when I called him on it, he didn't argue. He just said I was right and adjusted. She poured 2 cups. He's not used to being questioned, but he doesn't resent it from me. Why not from you? I don't know, she said. She brought the cups to the table and sat back down. He said something about being honest with me being important, in a way it hasn't been with other people. Diane wrapped both hands around her cup. How do you feel about him? I don't trust myself on that yet. That's honest. I'm working on it. Diane sipped her coffee. The money, she said. The debt. He wants to cover it. And the job. He offered one. Are you going to take it? I don't know. Nyla looked at the table. Taking money from him feels like losing ground. Yes. Taking money from someone who owes it to you isn't losing ground, Diane said. What happened to you was because of his world. He knows that. You know that. That's not charity. She paused. The job is different. The job puts me inside his structure, Nyla said. Yes. Diane met her eyes. So you have to decide if you want to be inside his structure. That's what I've been trying to figure out. They sat together in the morning light of the apartment and drank their coffee, and outside a car drove past without slowing, and neither of them looked at the window, which was its own kind of discipline. She had been at her mother's apartment for 40 minutes when Chaewon's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to answer it. There's a development, Chaewon said. His voice was exactly the same as it always was. Measured, professional, devoid of the kind of tonal variation that indicated personal feeling. And that was how she knew it was bad before he said another word. People only maintained that kind of control when they were delivering news that could break something. Tell me, she said. 40 minutes ago, a Korean entertainment news outlet received a package, Chaewon said. It contained 47 photographs, all surveillance images. You and Min Jae, the coffee shop, Piedmont Park, the Buckhead residence, the car this morning. She pressed her back against the hallway wall. They published them. The package also included a prepared narrative, Jaewon said, framing you as an operative placed close to Min Jae by an unnamed organization seeking to compromise the Kang Syndicate's leadership. The narrative claims you approached him, that the reunion was manufactured, that the medical debt history is fabrication designed to create an emotional leverage point. They made me the threat, she said. Yes. They turned the story around. They have documentation that looks legitimate, Chaewon said. Fabricated but sophisticated. It will take time to disprove. How much coverage? The original outlet is mid-tier, but the images are striking and the story is a pause. It's the kind of story that travels. Korean social media has already picked it up. The framing is that Min Jae is being manipulated by a foreign woman connected to a rival operation. They used race, she said flatly. The framing leans on it without stating it directly, Jaewon said, which is more effective than stating it. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, opened them. Where's Min Jae? Watching the coverage, Jaewon said. He asked me to tell you. I'm coming back now, she said. Tell him not to respond to anything before I get there. He'll want to. Tell him, she said. She went back to the kitchen doorway. Her mother was looking at her with those calm, diagnostic eyes. I have to go, Neela said. I know. I'm going to have someone. I don't need a babysitter, Nai. It's not a babysitter, it's just. She stopped, breathed. I'll explain later. Tonight. Everything. Diane stood and crossed to her and put both hands on her daughter's face the way she'd done when Nyla was small and something had frightened her and held her there for a moment. Just a moment. You've been running toward things other people run away from since you were born, she said. I raised you to do that. Don't you stop now. Nyla covered her mother's hands with her own, held them for a second. Then she left. The car ride back was different from the morning one. In the morning she'd been assessing. Now she was operating. She read the coverage on Chaewon's phone while the city moved past. The photographs were exactly what she'd been told. Her face and Min Jae's face across a dozen moments she'd thought were private. And the narrative underneath them was precise and vicious, and designed by someone who understood how to make a true thing look like its opposite. She had been flipped. A woman who'd saved a frightened boy had been rewritten as a calculated operative who'd manufactured a relationship to destabilize a criminal empire. The audacity of it would have been almost impressive if it weren't aimed at her. She put the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window and thought about Kang Dae-sung, a man she'd never met, who had never met her, who had looked at 47 photographs of his son looking at her like she was the first solid ground he'd stood on in years, and had decided that the most efficient tool in his arsenal was her reputation. He wasn't wrong about the efficiency. He was wrong about what it would produce. Min Jae was in the operations room when she arrived, standing at the screen wall with Chaewon and 2 other men, and when she walked in, he turned immediately, and his expression, normally so controlled, so precisely maintained, was something she hadn't seen from him before. It was cold in the specific way of someone who was managing the outer edge of something much hotter. I'm going to respond, he started. Not yet, she said. Nyla, the narrative is spreading. I know what it's doing, she said, and a response from you right now confirms the thing they want confirmed, which is that you're compromised. If you go loud defending me before you've neutralized the source, you look exactly like what they're saying you are. He stopped. The source is your father, she said. So we start there. He's in Seoul. I know where he is. She looked at the screen, at her own face in the surveillance photographs, at Min Jae's face looking at her in Piedmont Park, and the terrible clarity of what that expression showed. You said you had evidence of what he did 10 years ago, the arranged attack, the alliance. Yes. And you said you have evidence of his current arrangements with Jong. We're building that case. How long to complete it? Chaewon said, 72 hours minimum, to make it airtight. You have 48, she said, because in 72 the narrative about me is established enough that countering it requires twice the evidence. The window for the truth to win is closing. She turned to Min Jae. Can he do it in 48? Min Jae looked at Jaewon. Something passed between them. 48, Jae-won said. Yes. Then that's the plan, Neela said. Min-jae was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. You're not... He stopped, started again. You're not asking me to back away from you. Would that fix it? No, he admitted. Then it's not a solution, she said. It's surrender. She met his eyes. I don't surrender. That's the thing about me you need to understand. He held her gaze for a long moment. The council, he said finally. My father will use the coverage to call an emergency session. He'll request a formal review of my leadership based on the narrative that's out there now. He has the numbers to make that request valid. When? 72 hours, possibly less. Then we're racing him, she said. We're racing him, he confirmed. And if we lose the race? He was quiet for a moment, then. The council has authority to suspend my leadership pending a formal hearing. During suspension, my protections, yours, are gone, she said. Yes. She stood in the operations room with its screens and its cold lighting and the photographs of herself splashed across Korean social media and thought about what losing looked like and what winning required. There's something else, Jae-won said. She looked at him. The package that went to the outlet, he said. It also went to 3 other recipients. He pulled something up on the screen. The Kang Syndicate's council coordinator, 2 major Korean business journalists. He paused. An Atlanta Child Protective Services, with a fabricated report claiming that Diane Brooks is being financially exploited by her daughter. The room went completely silent. Nyla stood very still. A fabricated CPS report, she said. Filed 40 minutes ago, Chaewon said. Under a false name, but with documentation that will trigger an investigation, she said. Even if it's false. Even if it gets dismissed in 2 weeks, the investigation opens. They contact my mother. Yes, Jae-won said. She turned to the window. She pressed one hand flat against the glass and looked out at the city. The cold of the glass transferred into her palm, and she held it there and breathed. Slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Because her mother was 61 years old, with a heart condition and a fabricated CPS report just filed against her daughter. And Kang Dae-sung had never once met either of them, and had still found the most precise pressure point available and pushed it with his thumb. She heard Min-jae say her name behind her. She didn't turn around. He went for my mother, she said. Yes. He doesn't know me, she said. He looked at the files and the photographs, and he figured out that she was the lever. Her voice was even. It was the evenest it had been all day, which meant it was costing the most. He's smart. Yes, Min-jae said. He built this in layers. The surveillance, the narrative, the council play, the CPS report. This isn't reactive. He planned this before you landed in Atlanta. She turned around. How long has he been planning it? Min-jae's face was an expression she hadn't seen before on him. Something beneath all the control, something that was old and specific and deeply personal. Since I started looking for you, he said quietly. He's known I was looking for years. He just waited until I found you. She stood in the center of the room and looked at him. The man who had come to Atlanta to repay a debt and had brought his father's entire architecture of destruction with him, who had looked for her for 5 years, and in finding her had handed his enemies. The sentence she never finished hung in the operations room like smoke. Min-jae had handed his enemies the one thing they needed, and they both knew it, and neither of them said it out loud, because saying it out loud wouldn't change the architecture of what had already been built around them. The CPS report was filed. The photographs were spreading. The council session was 48 hours away, maybe less. Kang Dae-sung had spent years laying this ground, and they had walked onto it 11 days ago with their eyes open and still not seen it until they were standing in the middle of it. Nayla turned away from the window. What do we do first, she said. Min-jae looked at Jae-won. The CPS report. I can have it flagged as fraudulent within 6 hours, Jae-won said. I have a contact in the city's legal infrastructure who can... Legally, Neela said. Whatever you do with it, it has to be legal. If there's anything irregular about how it gets dismissed, he uses that. Chaewon looked at her, then at Min-jae. She's right, Min-jae said. 6 hours becomes 12, Chaewon said. Do it clean, Nyla said. Oh, 12 hours. She looked at Min-jae. The council session, can you delay it? Not without it looking like I'm running. Can you move it forward? He paused. Move it forward. If we're racing him to the evidence, we want the session after we have it, not before. But if we can't guarantee that, the second best option is controlling when it happens. If you call the session yourself today, this afternoon, you take the initiative away from him and you force him to show his hand before he's finished building. Min-jae was looking at her with an expression she'd started recognizing, the one where he was processing something faster than he was showing it. If I call the session, he said slowly, and the evidence isn't ready, then we present what we have and I testify, she said. The room went quiet. No, Min-jae said. I was there 10 years ago. I was the one on that street. I know what I saw. The car without headlights, the men chasing you, the way your own people responded when they arrived. And I know what it cost. She kept her voice level. I'm not fabricated. I'm a real person with a real story that your father spent 10 years trying to erase. If I walk into that council chamber and tell it, he loses the narrative. The council chamber is not a courtroom, Min-jae said. His voice had gone sharp. The men in that room have ended careers and lives over much less than what's at stake here. You don't know what you're walking into. Then tell me. It's 40 men who have spent their entire lives inside a world where power is the only currency and loyalty is purchased with fear. They don't care about truth. They care about leverage and precedent. If you walk in there as a civilian, I'm not a civilian, she said. I'm the woman your father tried to destroy before he even met her. That's a story, Min-jae. And stories matter to men like that, whether they admit it or not. You could be hurt. I'm already in this, she said. The moment Hyun-soo took the first photograph, I was in this. The choice isn't whether I'm in it. The choice is whether I stand still and let your father write my part, or whether I write it myself. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands, she noticed, were no longer flat on the table. They were gripped, knuckles carrying the pressure of everything he wasn't saying. I need to make a call, he said. The call lasted 22 minutes. She heard his voice through the wall of the adjacent room. Korean, too fast for her to follow even the cadence, but she could read the temperature of it. It started controlled and got quieter as it went, which she'd learned was not a good sign with him. The quieter he got, the more serious the weight behind the words. Chaewon sat across from her at the table while she waited and did not pretend to be doing something else, which she appreciated. How bad is the council? She asked him. Chaewon considered the question. Divided, he said. Dae-sung spent 30 years building loyalty through fear and reward. Min-jae spent 3 years dismantling the fear-based structure and replacing it with something different. Some council members prefer the new structure. Some preferred the certainty of the old one. How many does Dae-sung need for a formal challenge? 12 votes for a review petition. He has 9 confirmed, possibly 11. And Min-jae, 17 solid, 6 uncommitted. So the uncommitted 6 decide it. Yes. What do they want? Chaewon looked at her steadily. They want to know which version of the Kong Syndicate survives, he said. And they'll back whoever they believe is going to win. So it's not about right, she said. It was never about right, he said. It's about durable power. She sat with that. Outside the window, Atlanta was moving into midday, indifferent and enormous. The call he's making, she said. Who is it? His sister, Jae-won said. She hadn't known about a sister. She filed it without letting it show. Min-jae came back into the room 9 minutes later. Something had changed in his face. Not relief, but resolution. The specific quality of someone who has made a decision they know is going to cost them and has gotten through the moment of deciding to the moment of moving. Seoa is in Seoul, he said. She has access to father's personal records. She's been managing his household accounts since his partial withdrawal from operations. She can pull documentation of the Jeong payments. Your sister, Nyla said. Yes. He met her eyes. She's been waiting for this for 3 years. How much danger does this put her in? Some. He held her gaze. She knows. She's choosing it. Neela thought about a woman she'd never met in Seoul, opening her father's files in the middle of the night because her brother was racing a clock from Atlanta. Tell her to be careful, she said. Something moved in Min-jae's expression. Brief, real. She would say the same thing about you. Amatet. They worked through the afternoon in the operations room. Chaewon and his team building the documentation case. Min-jae coordinating with Seoul. Neela doing the thing she was best at, which was organizing complicated information into the clearest possible sequence. She sat at the table with printouts and a legal pad and built a timeline. Every event from 10 years ago forward, every intersection between the Kang family and the men who'd chased Min Jae through Atlanta, every piece of evidence Jae-won's team produced as it came in. She worked the way she worked at the hospital, methodically, without drama, one fact connected to the next until the picture was unavoidable. Min Jae watched her do it and said nothing, which was, she was beginning to understand, his version of respect. At 3 in the afternoon, Jae-won's phone went off. He looked at it, looked at Min Jae. Dae-sung has filed the council petition, he said. When's the session? Tomorrow morning, Seoul time. Jae-won checked his watch. 14 hours. The room recalibrated silently. So, Min Jae said immediately. She has 6 of the 12 documents. She needs 2 more hours for the rest. She has one, Min Jae said. Tell her 1 hour. Jae-won stepped out to make the call. Min Jae stood at the screen wall and looked at the timeline Nyla had built. He studied it without speaking for a long moment. She watched him read it, watched him follow the line she'd drawn from the night in Atlanta to the present, the full shape of what his father had built, and what it had cost, and what it was still costing. You made this clear, he said. It was already clear, she said. It just needed to be in order. No. He turned to look at her. I've had pieces of this for years. I never laid it out this way. His voice was quiet. You see things in sequence. You always have. It's how I work. It's more than that. He looked at the timeline again. You stood in an alley 10 years ago, and you assessed a situation in 3 seconds and made the correct call. You've been doing that every day since, in a life that gave you nothing to work with. He paused. I spent 3 years trying to restructure a criminal empire, and I couldn't build a clear argument against my own father until you spent 4 hours with a legal pad. Don't make it more than it is, she said. I'm not. He looked at her directly. I'm telling you what I see. She held his gaze. 14 hours, she said. Yes. We need to talk about what happens in that room tomorrow. I know. And you need to accept that I'm going to be in it. His jaw tightened. Nyla, you can fight me on it for the next hour, she said, and waste time we don't have. Or you can tell me what I need to know to walk in there effectively. She waited. Choose. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her. Tell me about every man in that room, she said. He told her. They flew out of Atlanta at 9 that night. She'd called Tamara from the car to the airport and given her the compressed version and listened to the silence on the other end that meant Tamara was processing. You're flying to Seoul, Tamara said finally. Yes. Tonight. Yes. To walk into a room full of Korean Mafia bosses and tell them a story about a street in Atlanta 10 years ago. That's accurate. Nyla. I know. You know, and you're doing it anyway. Yes. Another silence, then. Your mother? Chaewon's team has someone in her building. She knows about it. She agreed. Nyla paused. She said to tell you she'd like you to check on her tomorrow. Of course I will. Tamara's voice was doing something careful. You come back, you hear me? I'm coming back. With all your parts. I mean it. I know you do. Nyla looked out the car window at the Atlanta night. The lights, the skyline, the city that had been her entire world for 26 years. I'll call you when it's done. She hung up and put the phone in her pocket and didn't look back at the city again because looking back was for after. The flight was 14 hours. She slept for 3 of them, badly, on the reclined seat of the private aircraft with a jacket over her and the hum of altitude in her ears. Min Jae didn't sleep at all. She woke at some point in the middle of it and found him at the small table across the cabin with documents spread in front of him, reading, annotating in the margin of pages with a precision that suggested he'd been doing it for hours. She watched him for a moment. The overhead light caught the side of his face, the sharpness of it, the discipline, and underneath it something she'd been seeing more and more clearly over the last 2 weeks, something that was worn down, the way good things get worn down by consistent use. He wasn't invulnerable. He'd just spent so long maintaining the appearance of it that the performance had become load-bearing. You should sleep, she said. He looked up. I'm fine. You're running on adrenaline and whatever that coffee is. I've run councils on less. You've never run a council with me in the room. The corner of his mouth moved. No, he said. I haven't. She sat up fully and pushed the jacket aside. Talk to me, she said. Not about the strategy, just talk. He looked at her for a moment, then he set down his pen. When I was 20, he said, I sat in a council session for the first time. My father made me sit in the back of the room and observe. Not speak. Not be acknowledged. Just watch. He looked at the middle distance. He wanted me to see how it worked, what it required. He said afterward, now you know what kind of man you have to become. What did you think? I thought he was right, he said. I spent the next 3 years becoming exactly what he wanted. A pause. And then I understood what it cost. Not me. The people around me. The people outside the room. He looked at her. I started trying to change it, which is when he started fighting me. Because he recognized himself losing, she said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. In that room tomorrow, the men who support me, they support the version of me who is still partly what my father made. They need to see that version holding. If I walk in there and what they see is... He stopped. A man in love, she said. He held her gaze. Yes. Is that what they'll see? He didn't look away. Yes, he said, simply, without performance. She sat across from him at 30,000 feet in the dark above the Pacific and felt the word land the way it was meant. Not as declaration, not as strategy, just as the truth he'd said he was going to keep giving her. That's going to make tomorrow harder, she said. I know. And you're not going to pretend otherwise. No. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I hear you. She pulled the jacket back over her shoulders. Now sleep for at least 2 hours, or I'm running the first half of this council session myself. He almost laughed. She heard the breath of it. You'd probably do it better, he said. I do it differently, she said. Sleep. He slept for 90 minutes. She knew because she didn't sleep again herself. Seoul hit her like a wall. Not bad. Just enormous. The way truly large cities are enormous. The kind of scale that reorganizes your sense of what a city can be. They came through in the gray pre-dawn, moved through a private terminal and into waiting cars, and the city opened around them like something that had always been running at full speed and had no intention of adjusting for arrivals. She had 2 hours before the session. Min-jae's sister met them at the residence. Kang Seoa was 28, 3 years younger than Min-jae, and she walked into the room with the kind of energy that established itself before she said a word. Precise, direct, carrying a particular intensity that Nyla recognized as the specific kind that develops in people who have been underestimated their entire lives and have decided to make that a weapon. She looked at Nyla for a long moment. Then she said, in English that was sharper than her brother's, You're smaller than I expected. People keep underestimating that, Nyla said. Something lit in Seoa's eyes. She looked at Min-jae. I like her. I know, he said. The documents are complete, Seoa said, turning to business immediately. The same efficiency as her brother, dialed at a slightly higher frequency. 12 payments from Daesung's private account to a Jong organization shell company over 18 months. The Atlanta surveillance operation was funded through the 4th payment. I also found communication records, text-based, encrypted, but the metadata is intact and the timestamps correlate exactly with operational events. Can it be disputed? Min-jae asked. He'll try, Seoa said. He'll claim the account was accessed by someone else, that the shell company is coincidental, that the metadata was manipulated. She paused. But there are also voice memos, 5 of them. Father liked to dictate his thoughts when he couldn't sleep. Her expression was carefully neutral, in the way of someone who has processed the specific pain of discovering their parent's worst self in a voice memo. Some of them are instructive. Play one, Min-jae said. In the session, Seoa said. Not before. I want the room to hear it without preparation. Nyla looked at Seoa. He'll come after you for this. He's been coming after me for 28 years in smaller ways, Seoa said. This is just the largest version of something I've been navigating my whole life. She met Nyla's eyes. He went for your mother. Yes. Then he already showed you who he is when there are no witnesses, Seoa said. That's the version we're going to show the council. The council chamber was on the 42nd floor of a tower in central Seoul that presented itself to the world as a financial services corporation and conducted its real business in a room that smelled like old wood and the specific cold of climate control maintained at absolute precision. The walls held no art, The table was enormous, dark, polished, built for 40 men to sit at and look at each other across and conduct the business of power. 38 men were there when Nyla walked in with Min Jae and Seo-ah. The reaction was not subtle. She felt it before she saw it. The shift in the room's air pressure, 40 years of patriarchal order recalibrating around the fact of her presence. She was black. She was American. She was a woman who was not a wife or an aide, and she walked in behind the syndicate's current leader, and every man in that room understood immediately what her presence meant. She held her head level and walked to the seat Chae-won had placed at the left of Min Jae's position, and she sat down and she looked at the room and did not look away from anyone who looked at her. Kang Dae-sung was already seated. She recognized him without being told. He was in his late 60s, heavy-set in the way of men who had once been physically powerful and had let that power migrate inward over the years, into something denser and less visible. His face was Min Jae's face in 40 years if 40 years went wrong. The same jaw, the same eyes, but where Min Jae's eyes were old, Dae-sung's eyes were something different. They were the eyes of a man who had made so many decisions about other people's lives that the weight of individual lives had long since stopped registering as weight. He looked at Nyla the way you look at a piece on a board. She looked back at him the way you look at the person who went after your mother. The council coordinator, a thin man in his 60s with the demeanor of someone who had managed crises for so long that crisis was simply his resting state, called the session to order in Korean. Chae-won sat behind Nyla and murmured translation in a low, continuous voice, and she listened and watched the room simultaneously. Dae-sung's opening statement was controlled, formal, and surgically precise. He cited Min Jae's recent behavior, the Atlanta trip conducted without council notification, the personal relationship with a foreign national, the security breach that allowed surveillance photographs to be taken and disseminated. He presented the fabricated narrative without calling it fabricated. He presented it as a credible alternative interpretation of events that warranted council scrutiny of leadership judgment. He was good. She could admit that. He was very good. Then Min Jae stood. The room changed the moment he stood. Not dramatically, not with noise, but the way a room changes when the person who actually holds it chooses to use the weight of their position. It was atmospheric. 38 men adjusted their posture slightly. He spoke for 11 minutes in Korean, and Jae-won translated, and Nyla listened to both simultaneously. The actual words and the version beneath them, the argument built from the timeline she'd helped construct, the evidence Seo-ah had pulled from their father's private records. He laid it out methodically, without anger, without theater. Just fact connected to fact until the picture was unavoidable. Then Seo-ah played the voice memo. Dae-sung's voice filled the chamber, low, private, the recorded thoughts of a man alone in the dark. And what he said in it was simple and complete and destroyed in 30 seconds the narrative he'd spent years constructing. He spoke about Min Jae as a problem to be managed. He spoke about the Atlanta operation as a tool. He spoke about the girl, and the way he said the girl, the flat dismissive weight of it, the complete absence of any awareness that the girl was a 16-year-old who'd broken 3 ribs saving his son's life. That was what the room heard most. The silence after the recording ended was the particular silence of 40 men recalibrating. Dae-sung's face had not moved. Then he said, in Korean, and Chae-won translated immediately. The recording is fabricated. Min Jae said, the metadata, fabricated. The payment records, misattributed. The surveillance operation. Standard security protocol for a leader operating in a foreign jurisdiction. He had an answer for everything, prepared, immediate, delivered without a flicker of the panic that should have been there. Nyla sat and listened and understood what she was watching. A man who had prepared for this moment for 3 years, who had anticipated that his son would eventually come for him with evidence, who had built a counter-narrative for every document in Chae-won's file. She looked at the 6 uncommitted council members, read their faces, saw the things she'd been afraid of. Not hostility, but calculation. They were weighing the evidence against the counter-narrative and finding the weight close enough that commitment felt risky. Dae-sung looked at her then. For the first time since she'd sat down, he addressed her directly. He spoke in Korean, and Jae-won's translation came a half-second behind, low and controlled. Ask the woman why she came to Seoul. Min Jae said sharply, she's here because I asked the woman, Dae-sung said. In English this time, looking directly at Nyla. You speak, yes? Tell the room. Why are you here? Every man in the chamber looked at her. She felt Min Jae's tension beside her, felt him about to intervene, and she put one hand flat on the table, a small gesture, just enough to tell him to hold. She stood, her left ribs pulled slightly as she did it. The old catch, the old tightness from the healing that had gone crooked. She felt it and let it steady her. "My name is Nyla Brooks," she said. Her voice carried in the chamber the way voices carry in rooms built for gravity. "I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm 26 years old. I'm a patient care technician working toward my nursing license. And 6 months ago, I was sleeping on my friend's couch because the medical debt from an injury I sustained at 16 had spent 10 years compounding beyond what I could manage." The room was completely silent. "I was 16 years old when I pushed your son out of the path of a car on a street in Atlanta," she said to Dae-sung directly. "I broke 3 ribs. I sustained a concussion. I never finished physical therapy. I gave up a college acceptance I'd worked for because the financial situation made leaving my mother impossible." She held his gaze. "Your son promised to cover the medical bills. He didn't, because you intercepted his attempts and told him it had been handled. I found that out 11 days ago." She looked around the room then, not performing, just making sure she was talking to the room and not just the man. "I'm not an operative," she said. "I'm not a strategy. I'm not a liability or a leverage point or a foreign national compromise. I'm the person who made a split-second decision on a November night to push a frightened kid out of the way of a vehicle that your former patriarch arranged to use his own son as bait." She paused. "I have no stake in who runs this organization. I have no interest in Mafia politics or council proceedings or any of the architecture of power in this room. I'm here because the man who arranged that night in Atlanta and then spent 3 years funding surveillance and fabricated reports to prevent his son from acknowledging what that night cost, filed a false report against my 61-year-old mother with a chronic heart condition 2 days ago to pressure me into silence." She put both hands flat on the table. "So when you ask me why I'm here," she said to Dae-sung, "that's the answer. I'm here because you went for my mother." The silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then Dae-sung said quietly, in Korean, and Jae-won's translation came precise and immediate. "She is exactly what I told you she was. Emotional, unprepared for this room. A distraction dressed as a cause. She's the most prepared person in this room." The voice came from the far end of the table, one of the 6 uncommitted council members, a man in his 70s who had said nothing until this moment, who had sat through the entire session with the stillness of someone who had attended enough of these to have stopped being surprised by any of them, had spoken. He looked at Dae-sung. "You went after a civilian's sick mother," he said, "with a fabricated government report." His voice was flat. Not outraged. Just final. The voice of a man scoring a point. "That's not strategy. That's the behavior of someone who has run out of moves." Dae-sung's face did something then. Something small, controlled, quickly suppressed. But Nyla saw it. She'd spent 6 years reading the faces of people in pain who were trying to hide it, and she saw the thing that moved across his face in that half second. It wasn't anger. It was the recognition of losing. Min Jae stood. He looked at his father across the length of the table with the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for a moment long enough that the moment itself has become almost abstract, and then it arrives and it's just a moment, concrete, irreversible, requiring action rather than feeling. "I'm calling for the vote," he said. Dae-sung looked at him. Something passed between them that was older than the room, older than the syndicate, older than any of the politics in play. A father and son at the final point of a reckoning that had been building since before either of them had chosen it. "You'll regret this," Dae-sung said, quietly, just to Min Jae. "I already regret most of it," Min Jae said. "That's not a reason to stop." The council coordinator looked between them and then began the process. Formal, procedural, each man stating his position in turn. Nyla sat and listened and watched the numbers accumulate and felt the room's weight shift vote by vote. And when the 6th uncommitted member cast his ballot for Min Jae's continued leadership, and the coordinator reached the final count, the chamber held its breath for exactly the length of a sentence. 24-14. Min Jae had the votes. Dae-sung pushed back his chair and stood, and the room watched him do it. The former patriarch rising from a table he would not sit at again. And his face was controlled to the last, which was its own kind of dignity, however terrible the man behind it. He walked toward the door. He stopped level with Nyla on his way past. He looked at her for a moment. "You think you've won something," he said. I think you filed a report against a 61-year-old woman with a heart condition, she said. I think that's what I know about you. He held her gaze for another second. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Min Jae looked at Nyla across the table, and what was in his face in that moment was not triumph. It was something quieter and more complicated, something that had been under pressure for a very long time and had now been given the first conditions in which it might. The sentence that hadn't finished lived in the air between them for exactly long enough. Something that had been under pressure for a very long time and had now been given the first conditions in which it might breathe. That was what she saw in his face. Not victory. Not the satisfaction of a man who had won a political battle he'd spent 3 years building toward. Something quieter and more fragile than that. The specific look of someone who had been holding the weight of a collapsing structure on his own for so long that the moment the structure finally gave way, the first thing they felt wasn't relief. It was exhaustion. And underneath the exhaustion, so careful it was almost invisible, the beginning of something else. Nyla looked at him across the council table in the thinning aftermath of 40 men adjusting to a shifted world, and she thought about a November street in Atlanta and a frightened boy with old eyes and 3 seconds of decision that had cost her a decade. She thought about 47 photographs taken without her knowledge. She thought about her mother's pill organizer sorted by day and time, and a fabricated government report, and the cold glass of a Seoul operations room at 6 in the morning. She thought about what it cost to be the kind of person who moved before they thought. She thought about whether she'd do it again. The answer was still yes. It was going to be yes for the rest of her life, and she'd made her peace with that somewhere over the Pacific in the dark. Shin. The council chamber emptied over the next 20 minutes with the organized efficiency of men who had other business and had processed this development into their existing frameworks and were already moving to the next calculation. Several of them stopped to speak to Min Jae. Brief exchanges, formal, the kind of acknowledgement that meant something in rooms like this without ever quite saying the thing directly. Chaewon managed the logistics of the exit with the seamless competence of someone born to manage logistics in difficult rooms. Seoa found Nyla near the window while Min Jae was occupied. She stood beside her and looked out at Seoul, the scale of it, the light, the organized density of a city that had rebuilt itself from almost nothing and decided while rebuilding to become enormous. He hasn't looked away from you for 40 minutes, Seoa said. He's been talking to council members for 40 minutes. And looking at you the whole time, Seoa said. I notice things. It's a family trait. She paused. The useful version of it, anyway. Nyla looked at her. You took a risk with those files. Yes. What happens to you now? Seoa was quiet for a moment. My father will retaliate in the ways available to him, which are fewer today than they were yesterday. He'll freeze what he can of my access to family resources. He'll make it known in certain circles that I acted against him. She tilted her head slightly. He'll also, eventually, accept it. Because that's what he does. He calculates the most efficient response and executes it, and the most efficient response to losing a vote and having your daughter testify against you is not escalation. It's strategic withdrawal and repositioning. You know him well. I grew up studying him, Seoa said. Not with bitterness, but with the flat accuracy of someone who had converted something painful into something useful a long time ago. The same way Min Jae did, the same way you probably studied the things in your life that could hurt you. Neela looked back out the window. Your brother, she said. Yes? Is he going to be okay? She paused. Not politically. I mean, I know what you mean. Seoa was quiet for a moment. He's been waiting for this for a long time. The confrontation with our father. The chance to have it in the open instead of in shadow. She chose her next words carefully. The thing about Min Jae is that he is very good at surviving. He has always been very good at surviving. What he is less practiced at is what comes after surviving. Nyla understood that completely. It was possibly the most precise thing anyone had said to her in weeks. What comes after surviving, she said. Yes, Seoa said. That part requires different skills. She looked at Nyla steadily. He doesn't have them the way you do. Nyla held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked across the room to where Min Jae was finishing a conversation, watching the last council member leave, standing in the emptying chamber with the specific posture of someone who had just expended everything they had and was now running on whatever came after everything. I'll figure it out, she said. Seoa almost smiled. Yes, she said. I think you will. They didn't speak on the drive from the tower. Not silence born of tension. They had moved through tension and out the other side of it into something quieter. The city moved past the windows, and Min Jae sat beside her, and she sat beside him. And they were both, she understood, processing separately the same event from different angles. And the processing required the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. The residence was a penthouse in Central Seoul that she hadn't seen before. Not the Atlanta Buckhead apartment, but the real version of his life, the permanent one. It was larger than the Atlanta residence and more inhabited, which meant it had things in it that indicated a person rather than a temporary occupancy. Books. A specific disorder on the desk that suggested actual use rather than staging. A kitchen that showed evidence of someone who cooked in it regularly rather than occasionally. And Seoul, through every window. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass and looked at it, the breadth of it, the way the city ran in every direction to the horizon without apology, lit and moving and enormous. It's something, she said. You get used to it, he said behind her, and then you stop getting used to it, and it becomes yours. She heard him pour something, water, 2 glasses, and set one on the counter near her. She picked it up and drank. Your father, she said. Yes. What happens to him? Min Jae moved to stand beside her at the glass. He was still wearing the council session clothes, the dark jacket, the controlled formality of a man who had dressed for a specific kind of battle, and he looked, she thought, like someone who had won something at significant cost and was only now beginning to take the inventory. He loses operational authority permanently, Min Jae said. The council vote isn't reversible. He keeps his personal assets. I won't pursue those, and he knows it. He keeps his name, his standing among the men who are loyal to him. He paused. He loses access to syndicate operations, to the accounts, to the infrastructure he spent 30 years building. Is that enough for him to leave us alone? No, Min Jae said. Not immediately. He'll attempt smaller moves, social pressure, reputation management, trying to rebuild coalition with men who voted against me today. He looked at the city. But the voice memo. That changed the temperature of the room in a way that politics can't entirely undo. The council heard him describe using his own son as bait in a language that stripped all the justification from it. A pause. Some of those men have sons. Seo-ah knew that, Nyla said. Yes. Something moved in his voice. She's known how to use that room better than I have for years. I just didn't ask her soon enough. Why not? Because I was trying to protect her from it, he said, from the cost of being in it. She didn't need you to protect her from it. I know that now. She needed you to trust her with it. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. I have a tendency to protect people by keeping them outside the perimeter of the problem, he said, which means I end up solving things alone, which means I solve them worse than I would if I'd asked for help. You asked for my help, she said. Eventually. After managing information from me for a full morning. Yes, the corner of his mouth. After that, she turned to look at him. He was looking at the city, not at her, and in profile he looked like the version of himself she'd been building a picture of for 2 weeks. The real one, not the performed one. The one that cooked dinner and called his sister at 3 a.m. and slept 90 minutes on a transatlantic flight because he was too disciplined for panic, but too human to be entirely unafraid. The CPS report, she said. Dismissed as of 4 hours ago, he said. Chaewon confirmed while we were in the session. Clean dismissal. Your attorney of record filed the counter documentation, and the case was closed without investigation. Your mother has a written confirmation. She exhaled. It was a longer exhale than she'd intended, the kind that carries the weight of something you'd been holding without realizing how heavy it was. She doesn't know yet, she said. Chaewon's team will have notified her contact. Temura, she said. She'll tell my mom. She pressed her hand briefly against her ribs. The old habit, the old ache. I need to call her. Of course. She called her mother from the window of a Seoul penthouse while the city burned its evening lights below her, and Diane answered on the second ring in the voice she used when she'd been awake for a while and was managing something. I know about the report, Diane said immediately. A woman named Chaewon's assistant called an hour ago. Chaewon's a man, Nyla said. He sent a very competent woman with a very calm voice, Diane said. The report is dismissed. I'm fine. A pause. Are you fine? Yes. Did it go the way you needed it to go? Yes. Good. Another pause, and in it Nyla could hear her mother sitting at the kitchen table, hands around a cup, the apartment around her quiet and intact and entirely hers. Is the boy there? Neela looked at Minjay. Yes. Put him on, Diane said. Mom, Nyla Renee. She held the phone out to Minjay. He looked at it, looked at her. Something flickered across his face that was not, she was almost certain, fear of the council chamber, but was in its own specific way more significant. He took the phone. Mrs. Brooks, he said. She watched his face as he listened, watched it go through several things. Attentiveness, something that might have been contrition, the careful expression of a man receiving words he understood he'd earned. He said very little. Mostly, he listened. Once he said, "Yes, ma'am." Once he said, "I understand." Once, near the end, something moved in his face that was different from everything else. Softer, less controlled, the expression of someone being told something they hadn't expected to be told and didn't entirely know how to carry. He handed the phone back. "What did she say to you?" Nyla asked. "She said—" He paused, assembling it. "She said that her daughter has been holding everything together with her bare hands since she was 16 years old, that she was the best person she'd ever known and also the most stubborn, and that if I was going to be part of her life, I needed to understand that being part of Nyla's life meant being the kind of man who added to her strength rather than drew on it." He held Nyla's gaze. "And then she said that if I hurt her daughter, she would find me regardless of what country I was in." Nyla closed her eyes for a brief moment. "That sounds right. She means it." "Every word," Nyla confirmed. "I don't doubt it." He was quiet for a moment. "She also said to tell you that she's proud of you." Neela looked out at Sol. "She doesn't say that often," she said. "I know," he said. "She told me that too." Seoa came by the residence that evening with food, actual takeout, boxes stacked in her arms, delivered with the energy of someone who had been running at full operational speed for 48 hours and was now releasing it into the mundane task of making sure people ate. She spread it across the kitchen counter and poured soju into 3 small glasses and set them out and said, "We eat before any of you say another serious thing. That's the rule." They ate. It was the most ordinary the evening had been. 3 people around a kitchen counter in Seoul with takeout boxes, the city quiet through the windows, the weight of the day settling into something that could be sat with rather than fought. Seoa talked about small things, deliberately, the practiced skill of someone who knew how to create the conditions for decompression without naming them. And Minjay ate and listened and occasionally said something brief that made his sister laugh, and Nyla sat between them and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not safety. She was realistic about what safe meant in this world and this life. Something more complicated and more durable than safety. The sense of being exactly where the sequence of events had been moving toward all along. Later, after Seoa had gone and the takeout boxes were cleared and the apartment had settled into its nighttime quiet, Nyla stood again at the window and Minjay came and stood beside her, and they looked at Seoul together for a while without speaking. "The debt," she said finally. "Yes. Not just the medical bills, all of it. The scholarship I didn't take. The physical therapy I didn't finish. The years of—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not putting a number on it. I don't want it transactional." "Then what do you want?" She thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the tactical version, not the survival version, but the honest version. The one she'd been building toward since she picked up a card in Tamara's kitchen 3 weeks ago. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "Nursing, full program, without working 40 hours a week alongside it. Done. I want my mother's medical care covered, comprehensively, for as long as she needs it. Done. And I want to actually do the job you offered me," she said. "Not as a favor and not as management. I want real authority and real accountability, and if something is wrong, I want to be able to say so. That's what I offered. I know. I'm saying it out loud so we both hear it." She looked at him. "And I want to keep making my own decisions. About everything. About this." She gestured slightly at the space between them. "I don't want to be managed. I don't want to be protected from information. I don't want to be handled." "I know," he said. "Say it like you've actually integrated it." He held her gaze. "You don't want to be managed, protected from information, or handled," he said. You want to be told the truth and trusted with it. You want to build something alongside me rather than be placed somewhere adjacent to it. A pause. I understand that. I'm going to fail at it sometimes because it requires me to override instincts I've had since I was 20 years old. And when I fail at it, I'd rather you tell me directly than, I'm going to tell you directly regardless, she said. That's not a choice I'm offering you. I know, he said. That's one of the things about you that I find most. He stopped. Don't stop, she said. Clarifying, he said. One of the most clarifying things about you. That you're going to tell me true things whether I've made room for them or not. He looked at her steadily. I haven't had that. I know you haven't. It changes how I think, he said, about decisions, about what I'm actually doing versus what I'm telling myself I'm doing. That's the point, she said. They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, a plane tracked across the sky. A slow red light moving north, carrying its own cargo of people in transit between one part of their lives and another. I need to go home, she said. Atlanta. I have a life there that needs to be dealt with. My mother, Tamara, my coursework. I've been gone 4 days and it feels like a month. I know. I'm not. She paused. I'm not running. I know you're not. I'm going home to deal with my life, she said, and then we figure out what the next part looks like. Together. Not with you arranging things in advance and presenting them to me as conclusions. Together, he said. Quiet, serious. And Min Jae, yes. Stop researching my schedule. Something in his face. I've already stopped. Good. She looked at him for a moment. The boy in the alley, she said. The one who told me he didn't know if he would have done what I did. He's still in there. I told you he was harder to reach. He's not that hard, she said. He just needs someone to stop managing access to him. Min Jae looked at her for a long time. The soul lights moved across his face, blues and whites and the occasional wash of red, and he looked in this light, in this moment, like what he actually was underneath everything that had been built on top of it. A man who had survived a world that had tried to make him into something smaller and colder, and had not entirely succeeded and was only now beginning to understand what that incomplete success meant. I'll book your flight for tomorrow morning, he said. I'll book my own flight. Of course, he said. Then, can I take you to the airport? She considered it. Yes, she said. You can take me to the airport. Look, she landed in Atlanta on a Thursday afternoon, which felt right in some way she couldn't explain. The same city, the same sky, the same particular quality of southern light in October that she'd grown up inside. Tamara picked her up at arrivals and said nothing for the first 5 minutes of the drive, which was its own kind of statement. Then, you look different. I've been awake for 30 hours. Not that kind of different. Tamara glanced at her sideways. The kind that means something happened that changed something. A lot happened. Did you win? Nyla thought about the council chamber, about Dae-sung's face at the moment the 6th uncommitted vote landed, about the voice memo playing in a room full of men who had sons. Yes, she said. We won. We, Tamara said. We. Tamara drove for a moment, then, are you going back? To Seoul? Eventually, yes. Eventually, how soon? I don't know yet. Nyla looked out the window at Atlanta coming back together around her sat. The highway, the exits, the familiar grid of a city she knew in her bones. I need to finish my degree here. I need to deal with everything that's been sitting on hold for 3 weeks. I need to... She paused. I need to be here for a while. In my own life. Good, Tamara said simply. He's going to push. You're going to push back. Always. Good, Tamara said again. They drove through the afternoon and the city received them back without ceremony, which was how good cities worked. They didn't make a production of your return. They just continued being what they were, and you resumed your place in them, and the resumption felt like both ordinary and enormous simultaneously. Diane Brooks opened her apartment door before Nyla knocked. She'd been waiting. The tea was already made. 2 cups, a specific tea that Diane only brewed when something needed to be talked through slowly. And the kitchen table was clear of everything except the cups and a small dish of the sesame candy that had been Nyla's since childhood, without either of them ever discussing why it always appeared when something significant had happened. They sat down across from each other. Tell me, Diane said. This time, Neela told her all of it. Not the tactical version, not the compressed version. The full version. From the letter on Tamara's counter, through the coffee shop, through the operations room, through the Seoul flight, through the council chamber, and everything in between. She talked for almost an hour, and Diane listened the way she always listened, completely and without interruption, her hands around her teacup, her face giving nothing away until she had everything she needed. When Nyla finished, Diane was quiet for a long time. Outside, the neighborhood ran its late afternoon business. A delivery truck, someone's television through the wall, the ordinary sounds of people living their lives inside the structure of whatever they'd built. He called the next morning, Diane said finally. Nyla looked up. Min-jae called you? The morning after you left Seoul, Diane said. Before you landed. She looked at her tea. He called to tell me what the outcome of the session was, and to tell me that the CPS report was closed and give me the case number and the name of the attorney who filed the counter documentation in case I ever needed it for my own records. She paused. He also told me that he understood he'd pulled you into something dangerous before he'd fully assessed the risk to people around you, and that he... She stopped, choosing words carefully. He said he wanted me to know directly, not through you, that he understood what it meant, what it had cost. Nyla sat with that. You didn't tell me, she said. You were on a plane, Diane said, and I wanted to sit with it first. She looked at her daughter. He has his mother's way of talking, doesn't he? That quality where they say the true thing directly and let it land without dressing it up. You noticed that from a phone call. I notice things, Diane said. It's where you get it from. Nyla looked at the sesame candy on the table. She took one, held it, the small familiar weight of it. Are you going to tell me what to do? She said. I haven't told you what to do since you were old enough to understand why I wasn't, Diane said. That's not going to change now. She picked up her tea. What I'll tell you is what I see, which is that you've been surviving for 10 years. Very well, with a lot of skill and not enough help, and that you are, I know my daughter, ready to stop just surviving and start building something. She looked at Nyla steadily. The question isn't whether he's dangerous. The question is whether what he's offering is worth what it costs. Is it? Nyla asked. Not helplessly, just asking. Diane looked at her for a long moment. He called me before you landed, she said, before you could have told him to, before it was strategic. A pause. That tells me something. Nyla nodded slowly. What does it tell you? Diane asked. That he's trying, she said. Actually trying, not performing. Yes, Diane said. That's what it tells me too. They finished their tea. Outside, the afternoon shifted toward evening, and Atlanta's light did the thing it did in October, turned gold and low and stretched everything horizontal and beautiful before it gave out for the day. Nyla sat in her mother's kitchen and felt the weight of the last 3 weeks in her body. The transatlantic flights, the Seoul cold, the council chamber, the 47 photographs, the voice memo playing in a room full of men who had sons. And she felt it not as damage, but as something that had been tested and had held. She was still here. She was still, entirely, herself. The months that followed were not simple. They were not the narrative of a problem solved. They were the actual work of two people trying to build something honest inside conditions that had not been designed for honesty. And the work required repetition and failure and correction and the specific discipline of choosing over and over to say the true thing rather than the easier one. She enrolled in the full nursing program in January. The tuition was handled through a scholarship fund that had been set up under her name, legitimate, properly structured, completely separate from syndicate funds, and she'd reviewed the documentation with her own attorney before she agreed to anything, which Min-jae had anticipated and prepared for, which was both appropriate and still required a conversation about the difference between anticipating her needs and making decisions for her without consultation. That conversation had taken place on a video call at 11 at night, and it had been sharp in several places, and at the end of it, Min-jae had said, "You're right, I'll restructure the approval process." And she had said, "Thank you." And he had said, "You're going to keep doing this." And she had said, "Correcting you when you're wrong? Yes, indefinitely." And something in his face had shifted into the expression she'd started to think of as his actual face, the one that came when the control relaxed because he was somewhere safe enough to let it. She started at the Atlanta operations office in March. The HR compliance and community engagement division she was hired to run was real, as he'd said. Not a cover, not optics, but an actual function that had been systematically underfunded and undertreated and needed someone who understood both institutional structure and the human cost of institutional failure. She understood both. She remade it from the inside out with the same methodical efficiency she'd brought to every job she'd ever held. And within 6 months, the division had a staff of 7 and an external review that rated its operations as model standard. She told Min Jae about it on a Tuesday evening in April when he was in Atlanta for a week, and he'd sat across the kitchen counter from her while she talked through the review findings, and he'd listened the way he always listened to her, completely, with the specific quality of attention that meant he wasn't waiting for his turn to speak, but actually taking in what she was saying. And when she finished, he'd said, "I want to show you something." He'd pulled up a document on his phone, the restructuring plan for the Kang Syndicate's 3 largest legitimate subsidiaries, a 3-year roadmap, detailed, written in the language of someone who had thought about it for a long time. Moving revenue streams, divesting the most operationally compromised assets, building compliance infrastructure that would eventually make the legitimate business side of the organization genuinely independent of the criminal infrastructure that had originally funded it. "This is the plan," he said. "The real one. The full version." She read it. It took a while. He waited. "It's ambitious," she said. "Yes." "It's also possible," she said, "if you can hold the council long enough." 24 votes, he said. "I have 26. Daesung has been rebuilding." "Yes, slower than he expected because of the voice memo." He paused. "Some things don't recover from being heard out loud." "No," she said. "They don't." She handed his phone back. He took it and set it down and looked at her across the kitchen counter. And the look was the one she'd become fluent in by now. The one that said more than he was going to say out loud. The one that asked without asking. The one that was, she had come to understand, the most honest version of him because it didn't perform anything. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "What you've been giving," he said. "The truth. The correction when I'm wrong." A pause. You have that," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't take it for granted." "Good," she said. "Don't start." In October, exactly 1 year from the letter on Tamara's counter, they were on the rooftop of the Seoul skyscraper after a dinner that had started as a work meeting and turned into something that lasted 4 hours and covered everything from the division's expansion to COA's new independent advisory position to Diane's most recent cardiology results, which were better than the previous quarter. The city was lit below them in every direction, no horizon you could find, just Seoul running all the way to the edge of what the eye could process, everything burning its particular shade of inhabited light. No bodyguards on the roof. Min Jae had sent them down. Just the 2 of them and the city and the specific cold of a Korean October night that had nothing in common with Atlanta cold, sharper, cleaner, the kind that made you aware of being alive in a physical way. He turned to her. She watched him do it, watched him gather himself in the specific way she'd learned meant he was about to say something true and careful. Not a performance, just the preparation of someone who understood that some words needed to be given properly. "I want to marry you," he said. Not a question, not a declaration, just the truth stated directly, the way he'd stated every other truth she'd asked him for. She looked at him for a long moment. The city moved below them, indifferent and enormous and entirely unconcerned with what happened on rooftops between people who had spent years finding their way back to each other. "I know," she said. "Is that an answer?" "It's a beginning," she said. "What's the rest of it?" She thought about a November street and a split-second decision and 3 broken ribs and 10 years of survival. She thought about 47 photographs and a voice memo and a council chamber in Seoul where she'd stood up and told 40 men who she was and why she was there. She thought about her mother's hands on her face at the kitchen door and Tamara's voice on the phone saying, "Come back," and Seoa sliding a glass of soju across a counter and saying, "Eat," before anything serious. She thought about what it cost to be the kind of person who moved before they thought. She thought about whether she'd do it again. The answer was yes. The answer had always been yes. Not because it was easy and not because it didn't cost anything, but because some decisions were made before the calculation finished running, made by the part of you that already knew the answer before your brain caught up, made by whatever it was in a person that recognized the moment that mattered and moved toward it. She had moved toward him on a rain-soaked street in Atlanta at 16 years old. She was still moving. "Yes," she said. He was still for a moment. Then something happened in his face, the controlled surface of it giving way completely, just for a moment, just long enough for her to see the whole of it. Not the Mafia boss, not the Black Tiger of Soul, not the man who'd spent 27 years learning to be exactly as hard as survival required. Just him. Just the boy who'd looked at her from 10 feet away on wet asphalt, with blood thinned by rain running down his face, who'd said, "I'll find you," and spent 5 years trying, who'd cooked doenjang ji gai and called her mother before she landed and sat across from her in a Seoul council chamber while she told 40 men who she was. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I didn't ask for one. I want to give you one." "Later," she said. "Right now you can just stand here." He stood there. She stood beside him. Seoul ran its lights below them in every direction without end, and the cold came off the night in clean waves, and between them the space that had been distance, and then caution, and then understanding, and then something she'd stopped trying to name because it had become too much itself to fit inside a single word. That space was gone now, closed, collapsed into the simple fact of two people standing side by side on a rooftop, at the top of everything they'd built and everything they'd survived. Not without scars, not without the permanent tightness in her left ribs on cold mornings that would never fully resolve, not without the years that debt had taken, not without the photographs and the fabricated reports and the council chamber and all the cost of all of it, every bit of it real and permanent and stitched into both of them like evidence. But here, still entirely themselves. That was the thing about people who moved before they thought. They ended up in places they hadn't planned for. They paid prices they hadn't anticipated. They carried the cost in their bodies and their years and their careful practical armor built on top of everything that had tried to break them. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if the sequence of events moved the right way and the right person was standing in the right intersection at the right moment, they ended up somewhere that made the cost worth counting. Not because the cost hadn't been real, because what they'd built with it was. Nyla Brooks stood on a rooftop in Seoul and looked at the city that was becoming hers and felt the cold on her face and the old ache in her ribs and the warmth of the man beside her and thought, "I'd do it again, every time. I'd always do it again." And somewhere in the city below them, in the quiet apartment where Diane Brooks was finishing her evening tea, in the Seoul office where Seoa was building something of her own from the materials the storm had left behind, in the Atlanta neighborhood where Tamara was watching something on television with the comfortable certainty of someone whose person had come back whole, the world continued its business of being lived in, the way it always had, the way it always would. Even after the storm, especially after.